Morning, everybody. I'd like to call this virtual board meeting workshop together to order. It's pertaining to the Yolo Bypass Cache Creek Slough Partnership and Program Implementation. For the record, my name is Bill Edgar. I'm president of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. And on behalf of the board, I want to thank everyone for logging in or phoning in today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. This is a teleconference meeting, which constitutes the board's workshop meeting for the month of November. For those who have read the agenda already, you will notice that the staff has put together a rather extensive list of instructions, which are part of the printed agenda for this workshop. We've gone over these before, so I don't feel we need to do that again. Suffice to say, if you're having problems accessing the meeting or finding a way to participate, please email, text, or call Ryan Jones, our board clerk, or Leslie Gallagher, our executive officer, and they would be happy to help you. Now, regarding the meeting itself, I think the way we've run the meetings before has been good, and therefore we'll probably proceed today as we have. That is, as Ryan done before, he will be monitoring the proceedings from a technical point of view and will be operating the slides for today's presenters. He, as well as Leslie, Michael Wright, and other members of the staff will field comments and questions from those who have them, either from texts or emails that they receive, or you can raise your hand in the chat function if you feel comfortable with that part of the program. Second, you will notice that there are 5 substantive items on the agenda this morning, items 4A through 4E, which constitutes the entire staff presentation for the workshop. The staff has prepared an extensive facilitation plan, and they will be using it to guide our workshop today. Therefore, once we proceed, I'm going to turn the workshop over to Ruth Darling of the board staff. She will walk through today's presentation, and she will allow for breaks and lunch. Regarding comments and questions, we intend to ask for questions and comments from the board first, and then after the board is finished, we will unmute the public speakers, and Leslie and the staff will try to identify those who have requested to speak. Those speakers will then be provided an opportunity to address the board. After we've completed the public questions and comments, the matter will be brought back to the board for more comments and questions and suggestions. We are not anticipating any action today, but we will hopefully try to reach a consensus on next steps. You should be aware that the meeting is being recorded and will be housed on our website just as our other streaming videos have been for all our meetings. As I said, we will be taking breaks along the way as we suggest them in her facilitation effort. However, they will be short given the amount of information that the staff has to impart to both the board and the public. As always, Ryan will place a sign that appears on the screen during the break period and the estimated time that we should come back to the meeting. Now, before we begin, I should say that the purpose of the workshop today is to provide an overview of the Yolo Bypass Cache Slough Partnership and its program implementation efforts. I would also like to say that this is a huge undertaking and an enormous effort involving many stakeholders, many agencies at all levels of our federal system, and many stakeholders and organizations. There are a lot of moving parts and complex issues that will be implemented over a period of time during the implementation of our 30-year flood plan, which I hope will morph into the state's comprehensive water management plan, as the water planners are trying to do at this point. this is going to be successful, I think collaboration and transparency is the key to success. So at least from the board's perspective, it will be our goal to ensure collaboration and transparency as we move along. As a starting point, and something I'd like you to think about during today's presentation, I believe we ought to have first an agreement on the phasing plan, or the list of priority programs and projects that will be done first, so we can prevent the usual fights and tensions that occur at budget time. Obviously, the list will change as we move along and various funding sources become available and are apparent to those of us who want to move from planning to implementation. But I think it'll be essential that our prioritized list of programs and project, or phasing plan, have buy-in from all the stakeholders, from all the agencies and all the organizations involved in this huge and complex effort. And as the planning or phasing plans changes, which it will over the implementation of this project, I think it's really important that we have everyone's buy-in, and we have a discussion of those changes as they occur. So I think that's the first order of business, to get agreement on what's going to be done first, and recognizing it'll change, but have agreement on that. So when we get to the budget time, we're all on the same page in terms of priority. So I'm still under item number 1 on the agenda, which is the introductions and announcements. And I'll ask Leslie at this point, do you have any other announcements or introductions you want to make, Les?
No, Mr. President, I would turn it over to Ruth.
Okay. Well, we're on item number 2 on the agenda, roll call. And Ryan, if you wouldn't mind, please call the roll to determine for the record whether we have a quorum to conduct our business under Water Code Section 8560.
Thank you, President Edgar. Board Member Griego?
Here.
Board Member Johnson?
I'm here. Good morning, everybody.
Board Member Ramirez?
Here.
Board Member Valines is absent. Board Member Countryman?
Present.
Vice President Dolan?
Here.
President Edgar?
I'm here. Thanks, Ryan. We have a quorum, 1 member absent. The rest of the board is present. Members, we're on item 3 and would simply ask if there's anybody in the audience that wants to address the board on an item not on the agenda. Not on the agenda. And Ryan and Leslie, I'd ask you to see if there's anybody that wants to address the board on an item that's not on the agenda at this time.
I don't have anything here, Mr. President.
I don't see anything either.
Okay, well, let's move to item 4. And members, we're on item 4, Yolo Bypass Cash Slough Partnership and Program Implementation. As I stated before, I'm going to now turn the meeting over to Ruth Darling, our program manager in the board's engineering and technical office, who will facilitate today's presentation, which will cover items 4A through 4E. Ruth,
Thank you, President Edgar. Ryan, would you mind pulling up the PowerPoint? That looks great, thank you. Again, my name is Ruth Darling. I'm a program manager for the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. I'm really excited to be here today to present to the board, stakeholders, and members of the public on the Yolo Bypass and Cash Slough Partnership and program efforts to date. Today, you will hear from 13 of my colleagues from the Department of Water Resources, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency, Solano County, Yolo County, and a team member from the Lower Sacramento Delta North RFMP. The number of presenters today and the coordination that went into the planning of this workshop is a testament to the collaboration that has been underway by the partnership as a whole. I would like to thank all the staff that helped organize and plan today's workshop, including the consultants and their ongoing effort and support, specifically Kearns and West and Jacobs Engineering. And so it truly took a village to get here today, so I wanted to thank everyone before I forgot it at the end of the presentation. So why are we here? What makes the Yolo Bypass Cache Slough area special? The Yolo Bypass encompasses a diverse 59,000 acre landscape. It includes a 40-mile-long flood risk management facility that protects the lives and property across the Sacramento metropolitan region. It also is home to 44,000 acres of productive farmland in Yolo and Solano counties. As well, it is the home of the North Bay Aqueduct, which is the intake for the drinking water supply serving approximately 500,000 people in the cities of Napa and Solano counties. It also includes the Vic Fazio Wildlife Area, which is a 16,000 acre habitat that provides a habitat for a diverse array of birds, fish, and other wildlife species. And it offers multiple recreational opportunities while preserving scenic and open space. So at its essence, the Yolo Bypass Cache Slough region is a diverse collection of federal, state, and local interests. While planning efforts have historically focused on single-purpose projects in this region, the Yolo Bypass Cache Slough Partnership is a novel effort to develop an integrated landscape with local, state, and federal interests considered in advance together. Agency partners in the region share a multi-benefit vision for their collective efforts to improve the ability of the region's landscape to support a wide variety of public values. Next slide, please, Ryan. So as Bill mentioned a little bit earlier, the goal of the workshop today is to provide a high-level overview to address components of the partnership that include collaborative efforts, policy issues, implementation accomplishments, as well as implementation barriers within the Yolo Bypass Cache Slough region. This workshop is also an effort to explore how better interagency relationships, increased collaboration, and a willingness to look beyond our own needs can translate into a more efficient program and project delivery. The partnership is emblematic of this ideology. We are here to gain feedback from the board as well as stakeholders and members of the public that can also help inform the 2022 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update. Next slide, please, Ryan. I just wanted to touch on too, it's been some time since the partnership met as a whole. I know that President Edgar and several others on this meeting today attended the executive level partnership meeting in December of 2018. However, this is not indicative of a lack of progress. Significant progress has been made at the staff level to meaningfully address the barrier issues you will hear about today and advance project delivery. So the workshop is organized into sections. Oh, thank you. Based on topic, this presentation is content heavy and the workshop will likely utilize the whole 4 hours. We will have breaks for questions and answers after section B, C, and D. And we will have a 15-minute lunch break after section C. Because there's so much information coming out of the partnership's efforts, it is our goal that specific issue areas be flagged and identified, and then be brought forth at a future board coordinating committee. This will help facilitate a deeper dive into topics of interest to agencies, stakeholders, and the public. Next slide, please. So for section 4A, myself, Mary Jimenez, and Catherine McAlvin will be giving the presentation. Next slide, please. So the Yolo Bypass, one bypass, many activities. The Yolo Bypass Cache Slough region is a part of the federally authorized Sacramento River Flood Control Project. The Sacramento River Flood Control Project is a collection of levees, navigation waterways, overflow weirs, pumping plants, and bypass channels that help reduce the risk of flooding to communities and agricultural lands in the Sacramento Valley, as well as the Sacramento and San Joaquin Delta. As a project partner and the non-federal sponsor for the project, the board is responsible for the operation and maintenance of this project in perpetuity. Furthermore, the region has emerged as the focus of planning and project implementation efforts affecting multiple federal, state, and local interests. So potential bypass expansions were identified in the 2017 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update. In addition, many projects are already underway, as well as many projects proposed in this region. And there are a variety of implementation barriers that hinder the success of implementation of projects, and you will hear about those further in the presentation. Next slide, please. So this slide addresses the barrier and policy issues that were identified early on in the partnership's efforts. For projects to advance through the regulatory process and gain consensus from all interested parties, several issues had to be addressed. The 7 issues you see here were identified early on in the partnership through a series of collaborative meetings. And these barriers are seen as potential hindrances to successful implementation. However, we will not be discussing water quality in detail or project funding in detail today. So through identification of these issues and a dialogue to promote understanding of these issues, the partnership is able to develop potential solutions. The work groups you will hear from later today have worked to develop solutions to these barrier issues. And section 3 will touch on barrier issues overall. And I'm sorry, not section 3, that's section C. And section D, you will hear from work groups on how they've advanced solution to these barrier issues. And I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mary Jimenez with DWR now.
Morning, everyone. Good morning, President Edgar, members of the board. Thank you, Ruth. Pleased to be here this morning with you. I'm going to continue on and give an overview of this Yolo bypass as it's contained in the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, the state's long-term programmatic vision for flood system improvements in the Central Valley, and moving forward from 2017 towards our update in 2022. I'm going to give an overview of the recommendations contained in 2017 that we're working from today, a regional flood management planning and corridor management framework as they apply to the Yolo bypass, the conservation strategy and alignment with other state efforts in the bypass. As Ruth indicated, it's a very busy place, a lot going on, and with including a feature of alignment with the governor's water resilience portfolio. Next slide, please. The summary of the recommendations in 2017. Based on the work completed then, we recommended phased implementation of the Yolo bypass multi-benefit improvements over multiple years. The plan has a 30-year horizon, as President Edgar indicated. We recommended expanding system capacity in the bottom of the system first, where feasible, and working our way up. And more particularly, expanding the Yolo bypass in multiple locations with levee setbacks where feasible, including incorporation of ecosystem and multi-benefit features. The 2017 plan also recommended increased investments in operations and maintenance and small communities that are important to the bypass and the area immediately surrounding it. Next slide, please. The 2017 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, to bridge off of what Ruth covered, identified an array of flood management policy issues that were affecting implementation of the plan over its long-term horizon. I wanted to acknowledge today that Yolo bypass and the board and all of our partners are actively leading the way towards addressing multiple issues as they apply to the Yolo bypass landscape. The subset of those policy issues that are really the focus of where many of the Yolo bypass partners have been working are highlighted on the slide here. Next slide, please. The Lower Sacramento River Delta North Regional Flood Management Planning effort created major foundational work back in the 2014-2015 timeframe to support the 2017 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. They created their first regional plan back in 2014 and very quickly went above and beyond that foundational effort to create a corridor management framework in 2015. This Lower Sacramento River Delta North RFMP has been actively working and moving forward from their foundational plan and working ahead into implementation with our partners. At the same time, they're developing their updated list of proposed actions to inform the 2022 update. They're involved in multiple efforts focused on advancing implementation in their region, recognizing the value of the Yolo bypass, not only to their own region, but across regions into the north of where they're located. Next slide, please. I wanted to reiterate and remind, I think we've talked about this in some prior presentations, that in updating the flood plan for 2022, we are maintaining the same overall plan development process that we established in 2017. Beginning in focus now with updating our collection of potential actions that provide a solid foundation for the plan and our investment strategy. We are organizing the collection of potential actions and tying them to the array of intended outcomes that were introduced in 2017. For folks that were involved back then, you may recognize the icons on the slide, driving towards public safety, ecosystem vitality, economic stability, and enriching experiences, otherwise known as recreation, education, and related values that the Yolo bypass provides. Next slide, please. At the same time, we're working on updating the conservation strategy as an integral part of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update. I wanted to recognize that the conservation strategy as it's being updated is rightly focused on the how of multi-benefit. How can we implement multi-benefit more effectively and efficiently? And proud to be part of the Yolo Bypass partnership that is forging the path in that regard. So the work of the partnership is very much useful to our update of the conservation strategy and the flood plan in this way. As the conservation strategy and CVFPB indicate, expansion of the Yolo bypass for multi-benefits is also a key way to accommodate future projected climate change in and beyond the region in the Sacramento River Basin. Next slide, please. We're pleased to participate and be a part of the conversation with the Flood Board and our partners in a variety of venues for engagement and collaboration, participating in multiple meetings with the Yolo Bypass Cash Loop Partnership, engaging with the Lower Sacramento River Delta North RFMP, participating in the Flood Board's regular business meetings. Pleased to be here today, the special workshop focused on the Yolo Bypass Partnership and Program, and continuing to engage to the board's coordinating committee and advisory committees. Next slide, please. So alignment of the flood plan with other state efforts in the bypass. The Yolo Bypass Partnership and Program and those actions recommended in the CVFPB specifically support expansion of multi-benefit floodplain projects called out in Action 11.3. There are other actions in the Governor's Water Resilience Portfolio that support or guide implementation of the CVFPB more broadly, such as Action 25.1. But I wanted to call out particularly 11.3 today as it pertains to the Yolo bypass. Next, the California Eco Restore program was established in 2015 to advance 30,000 acres of critical habitat restoration and enhancement in the Delta, Sassoon Marsh, and Yolo Bypass region, and is an important part of what is being implemented alongside the CVFPB and the Yolo Bypass. To achieve its goal of accelerating Delta habitat restoration, California Eco Restore is working to address longstanding implementation policy barriers and build new partnerships along with all of us. And lastly, mitigation mandated by the California and Federal Endangered Species Acts for state water project long-term operations are also a high priority and active set of activities going on in the Yolo Bypass. And I'm very pleased today for my colleague, Catherine McKelvin, who's attending with us to tell the board and folks more about their efforts. So Catherine is ready, I'll hand the virtual baton over to her.
Accepted. Thank you. I am ready. Thank you and good morning. Thank you, Mary and Ruth and the board. I should start by saying that what I'm going to talk about, it actually falls under the umbrella of Eco Restore. And so those acres that are talked about for Eco Restore, these account for some of that. And so, as I know, all of you are aware, DWR is required to address the effects of state water projects' long-term operations on the environment, and this includes species that are protected under the federal and state Endangered Species Act. So I'm going to take a few minutes to present a very high-level overview of one of the requirements that comes out of that compliance with the Endangered Species Act, and that is restoration mitigation work that DWR is required to implement for a number of protected fish species. And this actually includes a number of projects that will occur within the Yolo bypass. Some that we've already completed, which I'll give you an overview for, and some projects that are still in planning. So this slide here summarizes what these requirements are. And so we have requirements for smelt species, which is the first set of requirements, and for salmonids and sturgeon, which is the bottom set. So we have what we call our fish restoration program, and this is intended to do primarily restore tidal habitat, but we also have a floodplain element to it. So we have to restore a little over 8,000 acres for Delta smelt, a little over 1,000 acres for longfin smelt, and longfin smelt is only a state listed species, it's not a federally listed species. We also, the purpose of this is to restore function and processes that promote export of nutrients and productivity to the Delta food web. So it's essentially creating food for these species. And as an offshoot of creating this habitat, we are also benefiting salmonids because it's also a floodplain habitat for them. So similarly, we have requirements to mitigate for effects to salmonids and green sturgeon. And so that is our Yolo bypass program within DWR. And this is something primarily we're doing in cooperation with the Bureau of Reclamation. So we're sharing the bulk of these costs with the Bureau of Reclamation. And so these requirements are to provide significantly increased acreages of seasonal floodplain salmonid rearing habitat in the lower Sacramento River Basin, which is the Yolo bypass, and also to reduce migratory delays and loss of salmon, steelhead, and sturgeon at Fremont Weir and other structures in the Yolo bypass. So next slide. And so I'm going to give you a little introduction to both of those programs. And so this map shows the fish restoration program, which again is primarily directed to smelt. And we have a series of 11 projects that we are well underway, and some of them are constructed, and this list shows you which ones are constructed. And we actually just did complete construction of the ones that are under construction there, Wings Landing and Lower Yolo. Those just finished this month, so that's exciting. And the ones that are highlighted in yellow are the ones that fall within the Yolo bypass. So you can see we have 2 finished, Yolo Flyway Farms and Lower Yolo Ranch, and those are right next to each other. And then we have 2 projects that are in planning phases, which is Lookout Slough and Prospect Island. And those are at the southern end of that map. And these add up to a total of a little over 9,000 acres of habitat for Delta smelt. And actually, none of this is habitat for longfin smelt. Longfin smelt occur farther down into the system. Next slide. And so then for the Yolo bypass projects, we have built and are now operating several projects, and then we have several projects that are in planning phases right now. So these photos are showing you at the top a before and after of the biggest project that we have finished to date, and that is replacing what was a substandard and just non-functional fish passage facility that you see there in the top photo behind the folks that are standing there. That's the Fremont Weir, with a new fish passage structure, which is shown below in that photo. And that was completed and started operating in 2018. And we've had huge success with that as far as really reducing stranding of salmonids and sturgeon within the bypass. And it's quite incredible. So very successful project. And I'm going to show you a photo of, I won't go to the next slide yet, but I will show you a photo of one of our ag crossings because those are pretty dramatic changes as well. And then we also have replaced a fish rescue facility, to deal with stranding of fish. And that is a very much more advanced, modern facility. And then we have several projects in the planning phase. And right now we're primarily focused on Yolo bypass, unwanted habitat restoration and fish passage project, which we hope to start construction next year and are required to finish it by the end of 2020 under our requirements under the Endangered Species Act. And then we're working on a road crossing and then a couple of other projects that are much further out. The next slide. And this is my final slide. And this is just to show you an example of a road crossing. This is one of the road crossings that we did in the Tule Canal. And so we replaced this, and this is a private road crossing. We replaced a dirt road crossing, which had a culvert under it and was really not passable, with a permanent structure that has very wide openings and is very passable by the target fish. And that's what I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine and Mary. So moving on from section A to B. Thank you, Ryan. This next section, 4B, Yolo Bypass Cache Slough Partnership and Collaboration, includes presenters from local, state, and federal levels of government. Alignment between all three levels of government is necessary to advance successful projects and planning efforts within the region. This potentially requires the alignment of policies, needs, benefits, priorities, and resources among the agencies involved. Mary Jimenez with DWR, Felix Young with the Army Corps of Engineers, Eric Nagy with Lower Sac Delta North RFMP, and Gary Bardini with SAFCA will discuss the history of the partnership, the vision statement, and the state and federal legislation that is proposed to improve implementation of the projects being considered by the partnership. Next slide, please. And I believe this is Mary.
Thank you, Ruth. Good morning again. Mary Jimenez with DWR. I wanted to start off the next section by calling attention to two quotes on the slide that were made around adoption of the 2017 plan. The first by President Edgar, and the second by our former DWR Director, Grant Davis. President Edgar was quick to recognize the importance of the collaboration built in the 2017 update, not only in planning, but that the planning would only come to fruition if everyone, federal, state, and local governments, landowners, and stakeholders continued to work together into implementation. So that plan didn't just sit on the shelf and nothing would get done. So along that spirit, we have been charging along together since 2017. And I love this quote, President Edgar. The second one from former DWR Director Grant Davis, recognized and called out the regional flood management planning effort in particular that represented an unprecedented partnership and level of engagement among the Central Valley planning entities. And he recognized that that could serve as a model to the state of California as a whole. Next slide, please. So bridging off of that, the strong regional partnerships, particularly the one that was formed in the Lower Sacramento Delta North region. The development of our 2070 plan incorporated input from the RFMPs, as I mentioned, but that process really was an initial opportunity to strengthen the relationships across the broad range of agencies involved in flood management, from the local level landowners all the way up. And it well informed our state's approach to improving flood risk management for our recommended investments and policies. So that extensive engagement that we began in 2017 are continuing now, not only to update the flood plan in 2022, but to advance implementation together in the Yolo Bypass Cache Slough complex is an exciting place to be right now. With that, I'm ready to hand off to Felix.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mary, for the introduction. Clearly, as Ruth and Mary have already said, the Yolo bypass began with flood risk management. But by now, it's also clear that all levels of government, federal, state, local, have to get out of our silos and think more broadly. And I think there's a broad recognition that we need to see this as a system with multiple possibilities to reach some system and region-wide goals across a very diverse constituency that we're all trying to serve. So with that recognition, the state convened and 15 federal, state, and local agencies came together to sign this memorandum of understanding. Now, this MOU and the subsequent actions we have taken together, I think show that it's more than just a matter of philosophy or principle at this point. It came and it continues to come with executive level commitments to roll up our sleeves, commit resources, and try to get something done together. That consistency of understanding, I think, has been beneficial for all of us. There's still a lot of work to be done. Every one of us will hear much more about all the detailed and hard work that's being done by the subgroups and working groups across the region throughout today's workshop. But we can always point back to this MOU to reaffirm this commitment that we're going to collaborate, we're going to engage with one another instead of remaining in our individual silos. Next slide. So as I just mentioned, the MOU memorialized some shared principles. Now, to be clear though, nothing in this MOU and our subsequent work in relation to it requires us to compromise on any of our responsibilities and obligations under the law, whether it's federal, state, or local. There's never been about subsuming or overriding any one entity's role. And just speaking just for my agency, for the Corps of Engineers, for example, we will still have to review the projects through our operational and regulatory permitting teams. And we will always have to maintain and uphold the mission that Congress gave to us, which is our mission related to flood risk management in this region. But we also know at this point that in order to make the system work and achieve the anticipated public benefits, the first step has to be about coming to the table at the same time with these common principles that you see on the screen right now and having direct conversations. And I think we've done that, from the individual work groups to the standing committees. I know, for example, that my colleagues Ryan Larson and Kevin Lee, who I know are on the line today as well, have consistently encouraged dialogue and engagement on issues related to a desired programmatic 408 that we will also hear in more detail later on today. And I think that kind of interaction and the understanding that comes from it will mitigate the potential for surprises that disrupt the planning, execution, and funding for all these critical projects that need to get underway for the different drivers that Ruth and Mary have already outlined for us. So with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Eric Nagy, to discuss this more specifically, the public benefits under this partnership. Eric?
Thanks, Felix. I think a lot of people could ask themselves, what are these votes and how do we get them to rise? And I think, the best way to look at that is not so much through an individual agency lens, but through the 6 pillars that you see on your screen. And, frankly, for this slide today, I'd like to focus on, one word in particular, and that's common. What 6 pillars of common importance? I think we all recognize that for projects, any project to advance in a landscape like the Yolo bypass, which is so highly regulated and of such interest to so many stakeholders, we're almost as independent or individual agencies compelled to consider the challenges of others. And this full suite of challenges is present in the bypass today. This all boats rise concept, it ultimately means that the interests and challenges of others have to be taken on as your own in order to advance your particular area of focus or interest. It's through the partnership and the discussions that we've had over the last few years that the interests and challenges in the bypass have really become summarized through these 6 pillars. And it's with these 6 pillars in mind that individual agencies can develop, identify, implement projects, programs, or policies more efficiently and with the support of the other agencies and stakeholders with an interest in the bypass. Achieving a true understanding of each of these pillars, their individual nuances, their history, and the legacies that they carry forth with them in the bypass, it requires strong relationships between agencies. And the partnership has been formed to facilitate the creation and the strengthening of these partnerships. Coordination here really isn't enough. It's only through collaboration and engagement where we individually feel like we've walked a mile in somebody else's shoes that we can understand how to address each of these pillars as we try to address individual agency missions or priorities. We have to ask ourselves, do we really understand the concerns of a rancher who has a habitat project moving in next door? Do we really understand the challenges that a habitat project places upon a municipal water intake facility? Do we really understand the consequences of an imperiled ecosystem as it relates in this part of the system? And to the degree that we don't have that true understanding, it's through building relationships across partner agencies and frankly, as individuals with other individuals, that we can understand the depth of these problems and how to solve them together. Next slide, please. The question here is what's at stake? And, you know, I think we all recognize that we're evolving from a bypass, as Felix indicated, that was really put in place for a single purpose, and that was to convey floodwater. And that frankly, originally had one land use associated with it, agriculture. And it's clear to everyone over time that the evolution is towards a much different landscape. The map here is not intended to be literal by any stretch, but symbolic or representative of the evolution that's slowly taking place and what the partnership and the agencies involved in it are trying to facilitate in a manner that's supportive and constructive and leaves the stakeholders and agencies at the table in a position where their boat has risen. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Gary Bardini with Safeca to complete the last few slides of our section of the workshop. Gary?
All right, thank you, Eric. A little bit of what I'd like to kind of stress a little bit here is kind of moving forward. I think we've got a lot of background on a lot of the progress and successes and challenges that we've been undertaking for many years. And really what I'd like to kind of talk about is how we're trying to strengthen the effort. And of course, this workshop itself today is a good example of our efforts progressing really a very complicated effort of bringing multiple parties together and agencies to try to provide for broader benefits and projects moving forward. On this graphic here, what is reflecting is some of the predominant challenges that we're trying to work through, that aspect of infrastructure, the aspects of how land use, how do we provide assurances, and how do we improve water reliability in the region. These are some of the fundamentals that we're addressing on the ground. But as agencies today, what we're trying to do is help promote those things. And obviously we're looking towards providing what Mary stressed earlier, system resiliency by the governor. And of course, this is something that is being stressed in all levels of government and to deal with climate adaptations and other things. But how do we really progress projects from essentially what we call single purpose and moving in a vertical to horizontally or vertically moving up to essentially more multi-benefit projects? And how do we basically evaluate those and how do we promote those in our appropriations and et cetera as moving forward? And then there's the aspects of the partnership itself that we're talking about, the collection of agencies. How do we move through what we like to call the chaotic environment of policies, federal, state, and local, working and having them very coordinated so we can actually promote the projects, working our way across the horizontal. So in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do and where we've been has been working through this. And of course, we're looking to strengthen our ability to progress through these thorny issues that need to be addressed. But really, how do we do it as agencies? How do we evaluate benefits better? And how do we work together as agencies collectively moving forward? So then moving to the next slide is I want to kind of stress then where some of the initiative has been in legislation really is to kind of promote both strengthening that horizontal axis and that vertical axis. And Right now, we have federal legislation, which is really aimed at improving how we evaluate multi-benefits. The department working with the Corps of Engineers did have what we call a Sacramento feasibility study. And unfortunately, it was a very single benefit estimated annual damage effort. That's the current process. But there is an acknowledgement at the federal level to look at multiple benefits. And there's been a number of guidances and stuff in previous wordings to try to promote that. So SAFTA, looking at where we know the deficiencies have been and looking at where the federal government wants to go, we've been promoting legislation in WRDA, which allows to have a pilot in the Yolo is a good example at a national level of how to broaden out benefit analysis, not just for that of what we call estimated annual damages, that damages related to flood, but looking at how you would benefit the environment, how would you benefit other societal efforts like agricultural stewardship, or sustainability, and many other things that I think Eric stresses some of the 6 pillars that folks are looking for. So right now we'll be looking for legislation to continue to progress. Right now it's still in committees, and of course the federal world is a little turbulent right now. We'll see where this effort continues and where we'll eventually make it through Congress. On the state side, we did put some legislation to help strengthen the partnership elements. We have an MOU, but I think some of those efforts really could stand a little bit more formalization of the objectives and goals of the partnership. Some of the things that we've been working on outside of even having legislation, but again, just having a little bit more acknowledgement of the partnership itself and the institution coming together to basically collaborate in a way that can progress some of the alignment of both the regulatory and regulations that a lot of agencies have. So right now, some of the predominant things when we did pass or pushed the legislation last year, which kind of got slowed up because of the COVID. So we do think, again, it'll be reintroduced by Senator Pan. And really it is just to kind of put a little bit more endorsement towards the partnership, acknowledging some of the regional things that were in those boxes, particularly the agricultural sustainability and some of the assurance issues that really need to be addressed. And then, of course, really trying to get enough program where we can secure additional appropriation funding for some of the good work that's been proposed. So these are some of the initiatives that we think kind of moving forward that can go a long ways to, I think, address many of the things that we've heard from the previous speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary and Eric and Felix and Mary. So we're going to take 10 minutes for questions. And I just want to note that if there's any questions that we don't get to due to a lack of time, the meeting is being recorded. So the group will have those questions and be able to answer them offline through email. So feel free to unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand, enter a question in the chat function.
I don't see any raised hands at this time.
Neither do I. Thank you, Ryan. Okay. I suppose we can move on if there's no questions. Any questions from board members? Hearing none. Okay, so moving on, section 4C, implementation, accomplishments, and barriers. This will showcase the variety of investments the state, including our federal partners at the Army Corps of Engineers, have made in the Yolo bypass region. These efforts highlight the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan implementation efforts, including ongoing investments in capital projects like the West Sacramento Southport project, as well as addressing operation and maintenance issues, which is a long-standing priority for the board. Jason Sibley and Rick Reinhardt will discuss the accomplishments to date and areas that we are working to improve our goals, as well as the barriers we must overcome to successfully implement the partnership vision. Jason?
Thank you very much, Ruth. Good morning, President Edgar, Vice President Dolan, board members. As Ruth mentioned, my name is Jason Sibley with the Department of Water Resources Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives. Rick Reinhardt and I are here to provide an overview of some of the project and policy accomplishments that have occurred in the bypass, as well as discuss some of the barriers that are being encountered in the system. Catherine McAlvin previously discussed some of the ecosystem accomplishments that have occurred, and Mary Meadows talked about how the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan and the various updates have worked with regional flood management groups to evaluate opportunities and challenges associated with managing the bypass. The focus of my discussion will be on highlighting some of the projects and improvements that DWR programs have helped support. These projects and improvements are consistent with the board adopted vision captured in the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. Some of the DWR programs that have worked with federal, local, and other state agencies to plan and implement improvements in the bypasses are the Regional Flood Management Planning Program, the Small Communities Flood Risk Reduction Program, the Urban Flood Risk Reduction Program, which involves the Sacramento-Weir bypass widening and the West Sacramento and Southport projects, the System-Wide Flood Risk Reduction Program, which supports such projects as Levels, Lookout Slough, and the Little Egbert Tract, and our Flood System Operations and Maintenance Programs, which support Deferred Maintenance Project, the Flood System Repair Project, the Flood Maintenance Assistance Program, and the Storm Damage DWR Emergency Rehabilitation Programs. At the bottom of this slide, you'll see a set of icons. Mary talked about these icons earlier. These icons depict the societal values that were discussed in the 2017 update as metrics to tying implementation effectiveness to the outcomes or benefits that we intend to achieve in the system. These outcomes are consistent with both the CVFPB plan goals and as well as the 6 pillars of common importance that were discussed in the partnership section earlier. These icons are shown throughout my discussion to highlight the types of outcomes these programs and projects strive to achieve. Next slide, please. As discussed earlier, the Flood Management Planning Program is a venue for the board and DWR to work with local partners to identify and prioritize flood system improvement projects that reflect the vision of local entities. There have been 3 rounds of funding so far for the 6 regions. For the Lower Sac Delta North region, Phase 1 was about $1.65 million and supported the development of the regional flood management plans via directed funding agreements that were completed in 2015. A $1.1 million Phase 2 amended the existing agreements for additional budget and schedule through June of 2020, which allowed the flood management working groups to assist in the development of the 2017 update and expand regional governance activities. Now we've started Phase 3, which is about $850,000 for the region to support the development of the 2022 CVFPB update and to further identify and describe potential system-wide improvements and identify regional and local needs for implementation. The contracts for these were signed in July of 2020. And as Mary mentioned earlier, the regions are currently, and including LSDN, is currently working on updating their project lists, developing a priorities white paper, and we'll be reviewing some of the other components that come out of the plan to provide input. Next slide, please. Also, as Mary mentioned earlier, the Small Communities Flood Risk Reduction Program helps address the plan's recommendation for reducing flood risk in small communities. A few communities around the basin have received Phase 1 small communities grants. Knights Landing, Rio Vista, Clarksburg, and Yolo all received around $500,000 for conducting a flood risk reduction feasibility study in 2017. For Knights Landing, their study recommended a combination of a new cross levee, structural improvements and repairs to existing Sacramento River levees. This study was completed in June of 2019. For Rio Vista, Solano County Water Agency led the study for the grantee. The study recommended actions were raising existing structures on the north and south sides of State Route 12, raising levee and seepage berm for Mellon Levee to allow for 200-year flood protection in the area. This study was completed in April 2020. As for Phase 2, the Yolo County was recently granted $15.9 million. The grant funds are to help implement partial solutions and actions recommended in the Knights Landing feasibility study. The major components of this project include the design of levee improvements along the Sacramento River, as well as mid-valley levee reconstruction sites for 9, 10, and 11, and a new cross levee. Additional design efforts would include Portuguese Bend and Grays Bend habitat enhancement efforts, as well as the construction of portions of mid-valley sites 9, 10, and 11. The highlight of this is the grant was approved in October of 2020. Next slide, please. The next several slides are going to highlight some of the larger urban and system-wide improvements that have been discussed in the plan. One of these projects is the Sacramento Weir and Bypass Widening Project. This project is part of the American River Common Features Project. It widens the Weir and Bypass by about 1,500 feet, which almost doubles the size of the Weir and the Bypass. It lowers the Sacramento River water surface elevation by almost 2 feet during high water events. Currently, it's in about the 65% design phase, with construction anticipated to begin in 2022. The state investment for this effort will be around $200 million. Next slide, please. The next project is the West Sacramento and Southport project. This is a $1.1 billion U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project that protects 48,000 people and about $4.2 billion in assets. Some of the project components, such as the Southport setback levee, have already been constructed, and the state cost share for this is approximately $276 million. Next slide, please. One of the major efforts being undertaken in our system-wide flood risk reduction program is the Lower Elkhorn Basin Levee Setback Project, also known as LEVELS. LEVELS is one of those examples of the type of multi-benefit projects envisioned by the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, and includes flood and ecosystem benefits while preserving the agricultural essence of the area. LEVELS expands the capacity of the Yolo and Sacramento bypasses and increases the level of flood protection in the counties of Sacramento and Yolo, including for the cities of Sacramento and West Sacramento. Additionally, the bypass is a key element to safely conveying floodwaters through the greater Sacramento area. LEVELS also paves the way for the upcoming Sacramento Weir expansion project that DWR is partnering with SAFCA, the board, and the Corps on. Some highlights from recent progress for the program is that DWR has made significant progress in securing property needed for the project in the name of the SSJDD and the board, and has necessary property rights procured for the start of construction going out 1 or 2 years. DWR also continues to work diligently to complete the remaining acquisitions to get through the end of the project. A contractor was selected through a competitive bidding process, and a contract was awarded. DWR has also been partnering with SAFCA for some of the interior drainage work in the basin and some pump station construction. The board issued DWR an encroachment permit in May of 2020. The notice to begin work came out July 15th. Construction mobilization started on August 15th. The DMI LEVELS team continues to coordinate with the USACE's Sacramento Weir design team to collaborate there. Next slide, please. The Lookout Slough Tidal Habitat Restoration and Flood Management Project is a proposed project in the North Delta around Liberty Island, the Cache Slough Complex, and Yolo Bypass, and has a footprint of about 3,400 acres. Some of the intended benefits for this multi-benefit ecosystem project are some of the ones that Catherine was discussing earlier, providing delta smelt habitat creation. This project would allow for approximately 3,000 acres of credit, development of tidal marsh, giant garter snake habitat enhancement, and upland wetland interface improvement. Additional benefits for other fish species such as longfin smelt, Chinook salmon, Central Valley DPS steelhead, and the Sacramento splittail. It would also widen a portion of the Yolo bypass to allow for increased flood storage conveyance. The main highlight for this effort is that the final EIR was completed in October of 2020. Next slide, please. The goal of this proposed Little Eggert multi-objective project is to achieve the following: flood risk reduction in the area, habitat restoration benefits, all while continuing to address the agricultural sustainability of the area. The main highlight for this effort is that a feasibility project was completed in 2018. Rick is going to highlight some governance accomplishments associated with this project in his portion of the presentation in a few minutes. Next slide. So the 2017 update included a deep dive into the issue of deferred maintenance within the system, highlighting it as one of the 8 policy issues in the plan in the update. One of the recommendations was to work towards addressing this backlog of deferred maintenance through improving the reliability of funding for proper long-term operations and maintenance. The next few slides that I have will discuss a few of the programs within DWR that are contributing to attempting to limit the backlog of O&M in the system by working with and providing funding for local agencies. The Deferred Maintenance Project is a state-funded program that is helping to evaluate and repair levee penetrations, looking to address known threats to levee integrity due to, in part, the 2017 storm, and performing specific deferred maintenance actions and working to enhance emergency response capabilities. Within the bypass, this program has performed 5 internal pipe inspections, performed a cast-in-place pipe rehab for 1 pipe, and performed geophysical EM 31 surveys at 25 pipe locations. Next slide, please. Our flood system repair project is part of the State Direct Levee Assistance Program to support LMAs to reduce flood risks by repairing SPFC facilities, specifically in rural area of the system. Funding for the repairs is through state and LMA cost share agreements with about a 15% local cost share. Excuse me. There have been several patrol road rehabilitation programs on LMAs which border the bypass to date. The LMAs that have been part of this program include Knights Landing, RD 108, RD 150, RD 1600, and RD 2035. About $2 million of funding has been provided to these LMAs to date for their programs. In support, next slide, please. In support of the plan's O&M recommendations, the Flood Maintenance Assistance Program provides maintenance and LOI SWIFT preparation funding to locals. The Budget Act of 2018 appropriated funding to DWR for OM, RR&R costs through the FMAP program. It allows us to partner with LMAs to work towards sustainable O&M by providing state funds through a cost share agreement to locals to reduce the accumulation of deferred maintenance. Allows for securing new OM, RR&R assurance agreements between locals and the board. Promotes consolidation of regional governance with LMAs, and improves eligibility for the Corps' PL 8499 program enrollment. 16 LMAs have participated in this program so far, and within the Yolo bypass area, several LMAs have participated over the past few years, including RD 537, RD 827, RD 900, RD 999, RD 1600, and RD 2035. In the previous 2 years, approximately $1.6 billion was, or billion, sorry, $1.6 million. That would be that's a little bit of a difference there. $1.6 million was contracted to these RMA or these LMAs, and as well as around $700,000 has been made available for this fiscal year to these LMAs, to these locals. Next slide, please. In response to the 2017 storm events, the department created the Storm Damage DWR Emergency Rehabilitation Repairs Program. I know that's a mouthful. This program is consistent with the plan in that it provides an avenue for DWR to work with the locals and the Corps to maintain integrity of the SPFC levees, bypasses, and other facilities in addressing the need for emergency repairs. In 2017 and 18, this program completed repairs with RD 827 and the Sacramento Maintenance Yard. In 2020, the program completed 2 repairs with RD 27 and is currently working on a repair project with RD 1600. That ends my slides. Now I'd like to hand it over to Rick to discuss some governance accomplishments that have occurred as well as barriers affecting implementation. Thank you.
Morning, President Edgar, Vice President Dolan, members of the board. Rick Reinhardt here today on behalf of the LSD. As the board's well aware, one of the policy recommendations in the CVFPB is improving regional flood management governance. In the LSDN, I would say that just the formation of the LSDN is a significant improvement in regional flood governance. It's created a venue where the RDs, the counties, the flood control agencies, DWR, board staff, and property owners are interacting regularly to advance the projects and the program and the bypass. Specifically, what's come out of the RFP process as part of one of our early deliverables was a Yolo County flood governance study. This study looked at how flood management is handled in Yolo County and dispersed among a wide array of agencies. And it made some very specific recommendations around improving governance for hydraulic basins. That many of the hydraulic basins in Yolo County are made up of multiple reclamation districts that either through consolidation or MOUs or working more closely together to make sure that the weak link wasn't the district doing the lowest level of O&M, that there was a consistent level across the entire basin. Now, for those of you that come from local government, you know that, or you probably have firsthand experience that these small jurisdictions don't like giving up their power. They don't readily consolidate or disband and giving their authority to another agency. It usually takes some type of forcing function. In the case of Lower Elkhorn, we had 3 reclamation districts. And in fact, the whole Elkhorn Basin is 4 reclamation districts. But the Levels project that Jason discussed a few minutes ago became a forcing function, that the project was going to significantly reduce the size of the Lower Elkhorn Basin, reducing the revenue that those property owners would have to maintain their levee system. They chose with financial support from SAFCA and the FMAP program to consolidate the 3 RDs into one, and they left open the possibility of bringing in RD 1600 in the future if that setback levy and RD 1600 ever moves forward. But it was really incentivized by SAFCA's willingness to take on the O&M costs for the new setback levy, recognizing that it was a system feature and that it wasn't financially feasible for that remnant district to continue to pay to maintain the same length of levee with a smaller district. That consolidation also, in part, led to actions by RD 900 in that a portion of 537 was in the urban portion of West Sacramento. And so that was detached. That's been annexed by RD 900. And RD 900 has an effort underway now to take over the responsibilities of MA4. We also have the Joint Powers Authority for Little Egbert Tract to pursue implementation of that project between the 2 RDs in that area. And lastly, we have governance studies proposed that came out of the small community feasibility studies for Clarksburg and Knights Landing, taking the multiple LMAs that make up those hydraulic basins and coming up with a plan for improving that going forward. It could be consolidation into one LMA, or it could be through an MOA or some other type of governance vehicle. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about implementation barriers. And I want to start with, what is an implementation barrier? In its simplest form, it's the reasons good projects don't get built. In the case of flood management, it tends to take the form of opposition from property owners, RDs, counties, and or the Farm Bureau. I think there's a tendency among some to think that success is achieved by following a defined process, such as the Army Corps of Engineers planning guidance or complying with CEQA and NEPA. The belief that a good project, if you follow this process, it'll lead to implementation. Or there are plenty of examples of projects here in the Central Valley that have churned in this process for a decade or more. I want to talk about one in particular in the Yolo bypass right now that is dealing with some of these implementation barrier issues, and that's the large fish notch project at Fremont Weir. This is an important project. Catherine McCalvin highlighted this earlier. They've certified the environmental document, and the adjacent reclamation district, RD 1600, commented on the EIR that increasing the flows in the bypass, putting more water in the bypass more frequently, has the potential to increase the O&M obligation on their levee. It'll also result in greater head on their pump station, increasing their electrical costs for operating that pump station, and also increasing the wear and tear on that pump station. The property owners on the land side of that levee are also concerned about increased seepage and how that's going to affect their ability to continue to farm. So there's been a tolling agreement between RD 1600 and DWR, I think for about 1.5 years now, as well as with Yolo County, and the property owners have actually filed suit. What I would highlight is unique about this project, or not unique, but there's not a local agency partner working with DWR and the Bureau to help advance this to deal with these issues. And so as the project's marching along, the project proponent is asking the property owners in the RD to accept those risks. Maybe believing those risks are small, but if you're the RD or the property owner, why should you have to accept those risks? Why should that be your responsibility? And so this is an example of a barrier issue. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how the partnership is helping overcome these. I don't know how many of you were in flood management after the 97 flood. One of the significant efforts that came out of that was the comprehensive study. And that was a partnership between the board and the Army Corps of Engineers and DWR to look at how we manage this system, or take a fresh look at how we modify the system to handle the large flows that we expected to pass. There was a top caliber team that was assembled that looked at all the ways we could modify this system. And they rolled out a plan that included expanding bypasses. I remember one of the more controversial elements was transitory storage in RD 1001. RD 1001, as you might be aware, has 3 small communities: Rioso, Nicholas, Verona. The bottom line is that we had a great plan, but it didn't recognize these barrier issues. And it ended up really not leading to implementation. Even though some great things came out of it, it didn't lead to implementation because it didn't recognize those barrier issues and the need to get broad support for the changes that were proposed. Right on the heels of that, SAFCA initiated the Lower Sacramento River Regional Project. It laid the foundation for what's currently in the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan in the Yolo Bypass. It proposed widening the Fremont Weir, setting back the Upper Elkhorn Yolo Bypass levee, setting back the Lower Elkhorn Bypass levee, widening the Sac Bypass and Weir, building a weir into the Deepwater Ship Channel, and opening up Little Egbert Tract. The plan also included ecological elements, primarily to benefit salmonids. So, from my perspective, from my very narrow flood management perspective, it was a great plan. So Tim Washburn was the lead for SAFCA at the time, and Tim went to shop this around Yolo County, and he had a meeting with Supervisor Mike McGowan, and Mike literally threw Tim out of his office. It's a great story for those of you that have heard it, but we were done. We failed, and we failed because a good engineering plan didn't recognize that how it was viewed in Yolo County is that Sacramento was coming to solve Sacramento's problems in Yolo County and looking to mitigate and to hold them harmless, but not really recognizing the need to help solve Yolo County's problems. And I think that's really the theme of the barrier issues is we're agents of change. We're coming into Yolo and Slough counties, and we're proposing changes to benefit the interests that are mostly outside of the counties. These include the State Water Project and flood protection for Sacramento as being the primary ones. So regardless of whether you share that view, that's how it's viewed in the counties and by the landowners. So what's different now? Here we are today. Jason just talked about a number of the successes we're having. And Eric talked about this earlier in his section, that what's different is we start with the success built in the RFP process and around the relationships that have been built, not just between agencies, but between individuals. The LSDN has worked closely with the RDs, the property owners, DWR, and the board to expand what has been proposed to benefit Yolo and Solano County interests. The elements that we've been added to the system improvements are all things that are in the CVFPB, projects for small communities, flood system repair projects, storm damage repairs, flood maintenance assistance funding. But most importantly, we're working with the property owners to address their concerns with projects that are proposed next door to achieve our goal of ensuring that all boats rise. Next slide, please. This is a map of habitat projects that are proposed or being studied in the lower bypass Cache Slough area. And I want you to put yourselves in the shoes of the farmers, the RDs, the county, and Slough County Water Agency. If you look just to the north of Lookout Slough, that's RD 2068. Just to the southwest of Lookout Slough is RD 2060. And just to the west of Egbert Track is RD 536. This looks pretty frightening to them. From the landowner perspective, this change in landscape is, in their opinion, threatening their continued existence. They're concerned with the large-scale loss of farmable land and how that ripples through the agricultural economy. The proposed projects will increase the presence of avian species who feed on the surrounding crops, reducing yields. Projects are also intended to increase the population of endangered fish species in the region that have a very small presence under existing conditions. The proposed project will also increase the organic carbon concentration in Cache Slough, negatively affecting the water quality for the municipal diversions. There are also an estimated 70 intakes in this area that are unscreened and do not have take coverage. All this is occurring in a region that has a significant number of levee deficiencies as well. There's $75 million in damage to the existing levee system in the lower bypass. The RDs have worked for years to get these sites corrected, but have made little progress in securing state funding to repair these sites. Through the lens of these property owners, they see the state seeking to mitigate for ongoing operations of the state water project in their neighborhood in ways that certainly don't help them and more likely make things worse. They're also concerned that the focus has been to implement widening of the bypass, and we're sending more water their way that will increase the strain on levees that are already documented as being deficient. To address the concerns over increased population of endangered species, the partnership has initiated preparation of an HCP to provide take coverage for the intakes. And you're going to hear more about that from Mike Roberts and Misty Cultrider in the next section of the workshop. I want to talk about Lookout Slough for a minute. This is a project that 4 years ago wasn't on our radar. Yes, that there was an area of study proposed for setback levee here, but it's pretty remarkable how quickly that project has come on board and now is positioned to be in construction next year. And that's not to say that we haven't worked out all the issues, but in the absence of the partnership, I do not believe that project would be ready for implementation next year. That there are a number of areas where there's a lack of agreement between the locals and the state, but the partnerships provide the forum to work through those issues to make sure that that project can be implemented and be implemented in a way that has broad support. We're also working with DWR to identify funding for levee repairs. So far, DWR has committed $5 million to levee repairs, and we're brainstorming ideas like, how do we carve off a chunk of those levee repairs and maybe pair them with some of the nearby multi-benefit projects that are being considered, such as Egbert and Peters Pocket. Lastly, we're working to ensure our actions strengthen the regional agricultural economy by offsetting the impacts of projects by identifying opportunities to invest in the remaining agriculture to make it more productive. An example of this is the Lookout Slough project proponent, EIP, is working with a property owner, an adjacent property owner, to take land that's currently unirrigated pasture and put in the infrastructure to irrigate it, making it more productive agricultural land. Lisa Sabatini will be talking more about our agricultural sustainability efforts in the next section of the workshop. I'll close by saying that our successes have largely been defined by learning from our past failures and creating a strong local, state, federal partnership with the local agencies typically having more flexibility to address the barrier issues. While Jason and I have highlighted our many successes, we've also shared the areas we need to improve on if we're going to be successful in transforming the landscape the Yolo bypass and Cache Slough is proposed. Thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Great, thank you, Rick and Jason. We'll move on to our discussion section for any questions. I'll ask for questions from the board members first.
I'd like to address my question. This is Bill Edgar. I'd like to address a question to Rick, if I may. The issue of governance you spoke to, Rick, is there any efforts underway locally to think about governance for the partnership in general? I know we're thinking about it in another venue at the state, but I was wondering what your thought about that is.
But I would just offer that this was a topic that came up in the steering committee, and I'm not the person to speak to that. Only that yes, it's being discussed. I don't know if Chris Trinnell or Eric Nagy or one of the other members of the steering committee has more to offer on that.
Okay, that probably wouldn't be talked about in the context of the planning phase of the partnership, but certainly that has to be talked about in another venue somehow. But at some point, we're going to need to talk about the governance for this partnership.
Understood.
President Edgar, as Rick mentioned, it does come up quite often in our steering committee meetings. And, you know, so we haven't really tackled the answer to that question yet. It's sort of like forging the path before we have all the answers. So what we've really been focusing on, without knowing what the governance resolution is getting the work off the ground and started. However, in the steering committee last month, we identified a path forward to lay out roles and responsibilities, as well as deliverables from each work group, and whether or not we need approval up the chain for those deliverables. And so we're going to work on a white paper that sort of tackles this issue in the next month or two. And I'm not sure if others, like Rick mentioned, if Eric, if you wanted to chime in on this topic, or Felix. I know the three of us have discussed that on multiple occasions.
Yeah, this is Eric. I'm happy to provide a couple of comments in the context of the discussion from the steering committee recently. You know, I think President Edgar, you know, when we talk about the term governance, you know, you kind of have to get to some foundational things across the member agencies. You know, I think Ruth hit one important one, which is, you know, what are the roles and responsibilities? You know, what's the role and the authority of the steering committee? What's the role and the authority of the executive committee in the partnership? You know, what is the role and authority of the working groups? And so I think we need to pin that down first. And then I think we have to kind of get at, when we say governance, what are we governing? And try to understand how the individual member agencies, you know, what their perspectives are on some of, you know, on that question, maybe specifically. And I think, you know, an important aspect of this discussion, you know, as you are well aware, is, you know, a point that Felix made during our presentation, which is, you know, the member agencies having certain authorities, right, and certain missions. And in a governance discussion, you know, at times those can get challenged or, you know, relinquished isn't the right word, but, you know, let's just say challenged. And it's a difficult topic, but I think you're right, and how Ruth characterized it is correct. I think we recognize that it is a discussion that we need to have, that we need to advance that discussion, that we need to explore it, because ultimately we probably need something more than the informal governance structure that we have now for the partnership, sort of informal and quite voluntary, to actually maybe advance to where we all collectively think we need to go for the landscape.
I agree. Let's see. I agree with that, Eric. I just wanted to make sure somebody was working on that. Now, do you, as the steering committee, view this as an area that's going to be discussed by the steering committee, or should we be? That really is my question. Should I be talking to Chris or Gary or whoever about another venue to be talking about this issue, or exactly, I just want to discuss. So there are problems with this. We have to have this has been recognized by me for probably a year, because in the partnership meetings, it's an informal group of people who get together and agree on something, but the flood board is the only one that has to sign documents. And that bothers me a lot. I mean, the cities and the counties and so on are not committed in that way. I mean, we can't say that the county board of supervisors approves the partnership the way it's headed, so we got to resolve that issue. And there are a lot of thorny problems with it, because you're really talking about sharing power, and nobody likes to do that. And so we need to move toward an understanding of, as you say, authorities and responsibilities, and how much power can we share, so on, and delegation of some authority to the partnership for certain areas and so on. I just want to make sure somebody's working on it and has that as a task to produce a report. And if you're doing that, then that's great. If you're not, then I need to talk to Chris to get something going in another venue to do it. So that was my real question here. I'm not looking to solve the problem next week. It's a huge problem, and it's going to take a lot of work on the part of a group of people to put that together.
So just a couple comments that I'll make, President Edgar. So the question's timely. There absolutely is a recognition that the steering committee needs to tackle this. I think that's probably, let's say a formal working forum to address this issue. Is there other forums and discussions that need to be had around this topic? Certainly. So it's probably all the above from that perspective. But I certainly anticipate that the steering committee for the partnership is the one that will tackle this and try to produce something as a result of those discussions for the individual member agencies to consider as a starting point. The second comment that I would make is you might be aware, there's a subcommittee of the steering committee that's working on a partnership narrative document. I will sort of reluctantly call it a vision document that tries to take the MOU the next step and sort of describe where do we collectively think we're all headed with the partnership. That process is underway with hopefully a product coming out for sort of public consumption by the end of the year. And I think that product provides us a nice launching point for a governance discussion, because it's within sort of that umbrella document that I think we can talk about, again, what are we governing, what is the scope of that governance discussion, and what are our individual roles and responsibilities within sort of the partnership and where it's headed.
That's great. That's very helpful, Eric. I'm pleased that that's at least underway. So that's great. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Eric. And thank you for your question, President Edgar. Are there any more questions? Brian?
Thank you. I raised my hand to ask a question. But while I'm here, first I just want to start by thanking all of the presenters for that. That was very helpful and good to see. President Edgar, just a quick comment on yours before I ask my question. I'm new here, but it seems like if we're not going to go back and rewrite the law, we're not changing the authorities that all of the individual jurisdictions have and the responsibilities they have to carry out their duties. And so what we're really looking at is using the partnership to create an alignment of values and an alignment of agendas, so that people can come to agreement about what people should, different parts of the jurisdictional picture would be doing. And a lot of that has to do probably with setting expectations for what the partnership is. And so your question about government governance to me kind of goes to that expectation setting, so that if the partnership is used as a place where representatives from different jurisdictions and different, landowner interests come into a forum to get alignment, then that's the recommendations that they're bringing back to their agencies for adoption for the things that are within their sphere. And hopefully they can get some support from, their colleague decision makers in their jurisdictions to be able to represent those jurisdictions in that partnership and speak for them up to the point where the decisions have to go back. Does that sound right, Bill?
No. That's a very inefficient way to operate any kind of an organization like this. The more formal way is, of course, with a joint powers agreement, which I don't believe I've ever heard of a joint powers agreement that involves state and local. And if you can talk talk about to Felix, the Corps of Engineers, federal agencies involved. I've never heard of that, but I suppose that could be done. I've been involved in agencies that are informal, like you're talking about, and that simply is very, very difficult to operate. And I operated one for Sacramento County and Sacramento City, the Housing and Redevelopment Agency, and I had to go back and forth. There was essentially 8 different entities, legal entities, that had a combined staff. And I had to go to each agency to get approval of the budget and all the things that went on in the Housing and Redevelopment Agency entities. And if we're going to use the partnership simply as a forum for alignment and discussion and have the representatives go back and bring back decisions, I think that's a very inefficient way to do it. I think ultimately we need to have a governance structure in which, for all intents and purposes, it has defined authorities and responsibilities consistent with this discussion we're having, but then makes the final decision on priorities, projects moving forward, programs, priorities, just like you would have any other governance structure. But right now, simply having a public forum to align interests, I think, is a waste of time. It's not a waste of time. It brings people together like we're talking about today, and it's very important. But in terms of implementing a program that's going to go over 30 years and have definite, responsibilities for getting those projects and programs done, you need a much more specific governance structure. That's my opinion. But but all I wanted out of this meeting today was an agreement on we have to move this along, and Eric Nagee's comments that the steering committee was already doing that was very helpful. And I we'll see what they come up with and what the partner agencies think about it and go from there. But I think a more specific governance structure is absolutely required. But we'll see. We'll see what they come up with. I just was concerned about nobody was even thinking about it, and that was wrong because the steering committee is doing that on a daily basis. So that's good. That's good. That's all I need at this point.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to understand this better. I certainly take your point about the importance of the issue. It's not immediately obvious to me how to implement something that you're discussing, given the different authorities that people have. But I look forward to talking about it more. The question that I have, I'm really particularly interested in the discussion of barriers. So thank you, Rick. That was very helpful, and reminds me of the old negotiation principle that the path to success is to solve the other people's problems, and so I want to tee up a question, which Rick or other presenters from the last panel could answer now if you'd like, but I think it also goes to what people in the next session will be having. So folks there could keep it in mind as they're making the presentation, and that is, if we had to pick the highest level priority for barriers for what the partnership should be trying to accomplish over the next year, what would that be? And if there's a particular role called for from us here at the Flood Board, what would that be?
So thank you, Member Johnson. This is Rick Reinhardt. I'll take an initial stab and encourage the other presenters to weigh in. The board has a very unique role. You're both an implementer as well as a regulator. And so many of the projects that we're talking about are going to come before the board for permits. And it puts you in a unique position to be a facilitator. That there's, whether it's the Fish Notch project or Lookout Slough or Egbert, wherever the partnership was unable to help address all those barrier issues, the board's going to have the final say in what needs to be addressed for those projects to move forward. And it usually comes down, in my experience, to property owner issues. It's kind of hard to say that there's one priority, but that's what I usually see in the projects I work on as something that doesn't always get resolved. And when I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking, I don't know how many of you have driven down a levee and you've seen a crook in the levee, and you think, why the heck is that crook there? That makes no sense. Why would you do that? Well, when we were doing the Feather River Setback Levee, which is a great project, we had to take land from property owners. And there was one property owner who was a specialty farmer who farmed different varieties of peaches, sold them at the market in Marysville. And he said, these rows of peaches are the best peaches in Yuba County. And that taking these peaches or these rows of peaches are going to put us out of business. And so today, if you look at in Google Earth, you'll see a kink in the levee where those 2 row of peaches are there. And they're there because the board facilitated that discussion. I know Member Griego was, I think she was the president of Three Rivers at the time, and she knows this firsthand that, at the local level, we do as much as we can, but when there are times when these issues are going to come before you, and I see that as the board's role as being the final arbitrator on making sure that property owners, farming interests, land use agencies aren't going to get railroaded by really what is a great idea, but just didn't figure out a way to make all boats rise.
Hey, Rick, if I could just ask a further question. When you said the biggest barrier are property issues, are we talking about mostly agricultural property issues or not, or just any property issues?
Well, it's concerns that an adjacent property owner has with the effects of the project, whether it's because the project
is it mostly agricultural interests that you find in your work, or other interests too, commercial, industrial?
It's primarily agricultural because we're not proposing a setback levy in the pocket for obvious reasons. In Southport, there were we did the Southport project. There were conflicts that were more associated with land use and development that was in the general plan. But I would say that just because of most of our project being in agricultural areas, these system improvements, that at least my experience has been, it's largely driven around farming interest.
Hey, Rick, this is Scott Shapiro. Let me quickly jump in on that. I agree with you. It also strikes me, though, that there are commercial residential factors, as you allude to, but I think those tend to get addressed more in the initial planning and feasibility phases. We see the large warehouse, so we know it's not going to be economical to move the warehouse. So we kind of initially design around it. And some of the issues you're referring to, Rick, like that peach farmer up on the Feather, that was something we couldn't figure out during feasibility. We only figured it out once we met with the property owner and we heard their particular concerns. So some of it is also just that as planners, we figure it out earlier on stuff other than agriculture, and we tend to figure the agriculture out later.
President Egger?
Yeah.
I just want to chime in on this discussion, and I knew Rick was talking about the rice farmers, the O. Henry peaches, when he talked about the crook in the levee, but also the other considerations that come up that don't meet the design is stuff like memorial trees. There was a family who had a memorial tree, and we actually moved the alignment in order to make sure that that memorial tree was not there. Or when we dug into the ground and found burial remnants, working through the tribal issues, that also put a different design on the levees. But my point, I also wanted to bring up another point about the governance, and that is, the ability to help these small reclamation districts, especially we're going to be going into some type of downturn in the economy because of this COVID. And we've seen it experienced in 2008, where they have a hard time maintaining what they are responsible for these levies. And so looking at this governance, and pointing to good projects that show that you can get more done, as far as your responsibilities go for maintenance on these levees, is when you either, come together and work together, or you, through the LAFCO process, put them together. This is going to become very important in the future because these reclamation districts cannot manage what has been given to them. And I know it's a power thing, but I think we have some responsibility to move that along.
I agree, Mary Jane. I think most of us from local government understand the governance issue and how important it is. I'm not sure others are as clear on that, but I think it's good that we're doing a study so that this issue will be brought to the top, because I think it's absolutely one of the issues that has to be resolved going forward.
I would agree, because of the fact that there's such a small window of work that is done, for levees to be reconstructed. The administrative part of it should not be as slow as sometimes the projects take. And so when you can streamline through good management, where you had made the point where you had to go to these different agencies in order to get approvals, that's ridiculous. That's wasted time. And so, looking at a structure that really streamlines the ability to move these projects forwards, or the decision process forward, is really important.
The hardest, just to make a point, the hardest part of my job during that period of time when I was running around to these 6 different governing agencies was labor relations. And you as a supervisor can certainly remember that. So absolutely. Anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. That was beneficial. Are there any other questions? I know we're scheduled for a lunch break right now, but this is our first actual discussion of the workshop, so it's exciting.
Ruth, this is Felix. Can I quickly chime in to answer Member Johnson's question?
Yes, please, Felix. Go ahead.
Great. Member Johnson asked about priorities, and first of all, I want to express my appreciation for Rick's presentation, especially kind of bringing us back down to ground on thinking about the local communities. I certainly agree that we should never lose sight of that, especially as we talk about these multiple levels of government being engaged. It always comes down to some of the individual communities and stakeholders that we should never forget. But I think that that's also the challenge of the partnership, is that we do have these multiple levels of government that are trying to achieve a wide spectrum of public benefits, as we have discussed at the outset of this workshop. So in terms of priority, the way I see it as a member of the steering committee and some of these work groups is to go back to understanding what exactly is a systems picture that we want to arrive at. This goes to the vision document that Eric mentioned. It also goes to President Edgar, your questions about governance, because those things will ultimately direct and guide us in coming up with a systemic picture. The local community's concerns are absolutely crucial and integral to that picture, but I think the nature of this partnership is that there are going to be different levels and different ranges of priorities that we will have to address simultaneously. And so I don't want to lose sight of the systems perspective in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. That was helpful.
I don't see any other hands raised. I think Brian and Felix already addressed their questions. So one last call before we take a lunch break. Okay, so we had scheduled a 10-minute lunch break. Does that still sound okay with you, President Edgar? Should we go for 15?
Let's make it 15, please, Ruth.
Okay.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Testing, testing.
Hi, Mike, I heard you.
Thank you. Just making sure. Hey, so I got some funky internet stuff going on, so I'm going to turn my camera on for a brief intro, but then I'm going to turn it back off for my presentation.
That's fine. More important that we hear you.
Good deal.
Thank you.
Turn it back on once we get to like questions and all that. I'll turn it back on.
Okay, perfect.
Hello, Ruth?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. I was just wondering if you, because I have to be on the phone and watch on the internet also. So it's a little computer problem. My computer completely died yesterday. So.
Oh no.
Yeah. So I'm trying something a little different, but we'll see if it works. I do have video, so I'll turn it on, like kind of like what Mike's going to be doing.
Okay, great. You're coming in clear, so that's good.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to hear your voice, Misty. I wasn't sure if I should take a look at the last slide just in case.
Well, you got it probably memorized already, Mike.
Not that one.
You know the drill. Yeah, I was going to say, oh, trash, Mike. I hope you're there because otherwise I have to stumble through yours too.
Yep. So far, so good.
I think we're okay. We're going to do a tag team. That's all good.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Good deal.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay, so we're at 12:12. Our lunch break is ended. I really appreciate the dialogue that's going on. I'm hoping that this can continue throughout the workshop. With just a little under 2 hours left, we're going to continue on with section D. So the next section, the landscape scale actions and efforts to develop multi-benefit projects and address barrier issues. The goal of this section is to describe how work groups are addressing barrier issues and advancing the goals of the partnership. These are issues associated with implementation of any project in the Yolo Bypass Cass Slough region. Mike Roberts from DWR, Misty Caltrider from Solano County, and Elisa Sabatini with Yolo County will address barrier issues such as how we promote agricultural sustainability and provide assurances that existing agricultural and municipal water diversions can continue to operate after the proposed projects are implemented. In addition, Rick Reinhardt will address how the partnership is addressing the long-term operation and maintenance while maintaining a multi-benefit landscape that we envision within the Yolo Bypass Cass Slough region. So Mike Roberts, I'll transfer to you.
Sure. Thank you, Ruth. President Edgar, Vice President Dolan, members of the board, good afternoon. We are happy to be here to present progress in the assurances working group, specifically on development of an HCP. I'm going to be tag teaming this presentation with Misty Caltrider from Solano County, so I'll run through a few slides, then hand it off to Misty. You all heard before lunch kind of a focus on barriers, but we want to make sure that we also speak to the progress they're actually making on solutions, which is the ultimate intent of the partnership. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera back off as I go through the presentation to avoid any glitches here on this end. Great. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background. You've heard from other presenters that the Yolo Bypass and Cache Slough region really is a focus of tidal habitat restoration projects. A lot of reasons for this. The tidal elevation range that is in that area and other physical characteristics have really resulted in a lot of projects focusing in this area. For a long time now, that's generated local concerns over impacts to existing water diversions. One of the previous discussions was, what are some of the most significant barriers to implementation? And this is certainly one of them in providing regulatory assurances to those existing diversions to be able to increase that comfort level. So the Yolo Cache Partnership created the Assurances Working Group to focus on that problem. We vetted a series of possible regulatory approaches that would be most appropriate, and in 2018 we landed on an HCP as the best of the bunch. The goal is very simple. We just want to ensure continued O&M of those existing diversions. Next slide, please. So we've tackled this in a phased approach. Phase one started back in September of 2019. Wrapped up in June of 2020, and this was really a scoping phase. Before we actually got started on all this work, the group got together and talked through a lot of the pieces and parts that you need to consider when you're putting an HCP together. What were our best guesses on plan area? What did we think the covered activities would be? What did we think the covered species would be? Again, all the focuses that an HCP needs to think about. So that really gave us a chance to look at what kind of existing information we had available. That information and the initial ideas in that phase one were used to scope out phase two and get all the contracting and funding in place to initiate that phase. We started that in July of this year, and since then we've been off and running. Phase two entails drafting the actual HCP document itself, getting a start on the CEQA and NEPA documents, and initiating public review, with phase three being handling all the various processes to get those documents to completion and landing on permit applications. Next slide, please. So a little bit about who's involved in putting the HCP together. So again, this of course, started under the auspices of the Yolo Cache Partnership and the Assurances Working Group. That's the big green box in the middle here. You can see the various entities involved in the partnership. A good chunk of those entities are also involved in participating in the working group itself. We then created a steering committee that was initially formed by who the parties we thought would be the potential applicants for the HCP. And the role of that steering committee is to review initial drafts from ICF. They're the contractor that's doing the technical lift on putting the HCP together. We would generally take a first pass through those materials and appropriately plate them for review by the larger working group. Intake owners and operators also have direct input into this process, and Misty will touch on that in a little bit here. But landing on this top bar with the County of Solano in the lead on the HCP. This is, of course, with support of DWR and the entire steering committee as well. Next slide. Thank you. So timeline. Anybody that has heard the acronym HCP knows that these can generally take a while, but we feel pretty confident in this case that that's not the case here. We'll touch on a couple of reasons for that in the next couple of slides, but really one of the biggest reasons we think we can meet this aggressive timeline is trying to keep the scope of the covered activities as focused as we possibly can. So there's a lot of information here, but we just want to have you take away three kind of themes that run across the slide. We've got the HCP development itself, technical analyses. ICF is working on a number of aspects of the HCP concurrently. moving all that forward. We've got a public involvement process that, again, Misty will speak to in a bit. It's got a series of workshops. And then lastly, the environmental review and regulatory documents, that CEQA and NEPA piece. And I just want to note the public involvement in those workshops. This does not include the many meetings that the partnership is engaged in, the assurances working group meetings, the HCP meetings that are just part of the partnership conducting its business. There are a whole lot more meetings that are not, of course, reflected on this timeline. Next slide, please. So I want to step through a few things that we're calling working assumptions. Nothing is final in an HCP until it is. So these are just the assumptions that we're using right now to really inform how we proceed and what our next steps are. So again, that Solano County lead role has evolved over time. Stepping to the draft covered activities, again, for a long time, we've heard that this is really a focus on the existing diversion operators out there. So it's worth noting that this is not your standard HCP. You know, a lot of HCPs focus on new impacts, new projects, something new that's occurring out there, and this one is a little bit different. This is not some new large diversion or changes in existing diversions. We're just seeking to cover the existing operators that are out there. And I should note on this slide, we should have included maintenance as well. That is most definitely included. We also made sure to check other processes going on in the region. There are 2 HCPs that at least partially overlap in this area, and we just did due diligence along those lines to make sure we weren't covering anything that we didn't need to that might be covered under other processes. These covered activities directed us to a short list of covered species. We've got 8 fish species, salmon and smelt, of course, along with a few others, and then 3 terrestrial species. And those are really pulled in by those maintenance activities that occur in the immediate vicinity of the diversion facilities themselves. A little bit about the EIR and EIS docs. We are anticipating an approach where we think these are going to be separate. There are some new timelines, new guidance for NEPA that restrict the amount of time that you have to complete that process. So this approach definitely requires a bit more discussion among the work group to figure things out, but our basic approach is to think about separating the documents, making as much progress on a CEQA document as we possibly can, and then very carefully figuring out when is the best time to pull the trigger and initiate the NEPA process to meet those timelines. Last 2 bullets, these get a little techie, but we want to mention them because these are a few of those things that we mentioned earlier we think will really help us meet this timeline. ICF is applying a very similar approach that has been applied in the BIOP, where we're looking to utilize water diversions as the way that we calculate our estimation of take. So we'll be looking at diversion characteristics, quantity, timing, etc. There are calculations on how they translate these characteristics into that estimate of take. Lots to explain there, a lot of detail behind that, and it's going to require careful review by our agency partners, of course. But the main message there is that we really are trying to build on approaches used and data sets that we have available to do things a little bit more quickly than if we didn't have those things to rely on. Same thing with the last bullet. One of the aspects of an HCP is enforceability. You need to make sure that there's some kind of enforcement there. And what we want to do is not have to create some new mechanism where operators out there will have to newly report, diversion quantities, et cetera. We just want to make sure that we can leverage the existing reporting mechanisms that they already need to use. So there's State Water Resource Control Board reporting requirements that we're going to be relying on heavily, so we don't have to create anything new here. Next slide. So a couple of points on our current status, things we're working on right now. We've got a draft charter complete. The charter is the document that does some basic role clarification, clarifies how we're all going to work together, things like dispute resolution process. It was something suggested by the regulatory agencies, and I think the rest of the team ended up feeling it's a pretty good idea to go ahead and spell these things out. We've also completed a field visit and a virtual tour. Big thanks to Brian Bush of RD 2068 for really making this happen. They were able to get out there and get ICF technical folks out on the ground. They were able to get photo documentation of the area, the types of diversions, get some drone footage. We were able to utilize that to conduct a bit of a virtual tour for the agency partners that haven't been out on the ground before. Super helpful. A lot of focus right now on diversion accounting. Again, I mentioned this is really going to be important for size of the diversion, timing that it's operated. That is all going to feed into a bullet point down below and a little bit the effects analysis. But before getting there, covered activities. Again, we've just put some final touches on those, spelled out the maintenance activities a bit more, and that material just went to the working group for review a week or so ago. This next bullet is a big one, the effects analysis and the conservation strategy. So this is info that everybody in the working group and the stakeholders in the area have been kind of chomping at the bit to get a look at since we started. The effects analysis really is that the work that ICF is putting in to create the calculations that will, do the analysis to tell us what kind of an effect these diversions are actually having. What do we think our estimation of take really is? We've got that partially complete for the key fish species. They need to do some more work to take a look at the other species that we want to look at. But the fish species was really the big one for them to work through. That has also gone to the working group for review and comment. Then the next important piece that follows right on the heels of that, the conservation strategy. So once you know what the effects are, the conservation strategy is that articulation of the avoidance, minimization, mitigation actions that we think we need to offset that impact. That has not yet been shared with the working group. We've just gotten a very first peek at very initial ideas from ICF on that one. So that's going to be receiving more focus here soon. And then lastly and importantly, you got your effects analysis, tells you what kind of impact you're looking at. You have your conservation strategy telling you what we think the mitigation actions are. Well, the next piece is implementation. So there's been a lot of question on how this effort actually gets funded. We're happy to report that in some recent Prop 68 funding, the HCP implementation was one of the items that successfully stayed on the list, and we have $2.5 million that will go towards supporting implementation. So fantastic news on that front. We have no idea if 2.5 is going to be enough. Probably not. But we didn't want to miss any opportunities to start directing funds here where we could. Next slide, please. So just a few next steps. Continuing development of the HCP. That's just a reiteration of a few of the points previously. A lot of pieces and parts moving we still need to work on. Finalizing the charter and increasing agency engagement. We've got a couple of things we really need to figure out with the agency, so we've got a few meetings set up. One of those, importantly, is to talk through things like designating the NEPA lead. We're just on the verge of getting enough information to the agencies that they can really start to think through who best would fill that role. Next one, evaluating enrollment mechanisms. I'm sorry. Go back to that slide, please. I just meant the next bullet. Thank you. So evaluating enrollment mechanisms, this is about how the diverters actually secure their take protection. There's a range of enrollment mechanisms all the way from lots of engagement and requirements by the diverters to very little requirements of the diverters. They all have their pros and cons. They fit different situations. So, we of course probably all want to land on a range of the diverters having to do as little as possible. But we're still working through that, and we may end up applying some kind of a hybrid approach. And then lastly, we're just on the verge of enough progress and thinking that we can probably start initiating drafting the CEQA document very soon here. Next slide. I want to hand it off to Misty here to speak to the outreach, but I just want to finish my part with voicing a note of appreciation for everybody on the steering committee, the assurances working group. I really do feel that this is a concrete example of the solutions that I think the partnership really envisioned a few years ago when we all signed an MOU, and here we are making solid strides. So just appreciation to the team that's working on this. Take it away, Misty.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Mike, and I really appreciate that. And so Misty Coltwriter, Solano County here, and thank you, President Edgar and the team for our to present here today. Basically, just as Mike has been indicating, as mentioned, the development of the HCP has been in works for quite a few years, essentially, and this is part of the partnership and then the steering committee to really think outside of the box on what can be done out in this area. So, during this time, we've reached out to the other water take owners in the water intake owners in the Cache Slough region to better understanding what their concerns are and to incorporate components of what would go into this plan that balances the goals of the species and habitat conservation with the water supply needs to sustain ag and support economic growth in the region. We also see engagement of the landowners and other stakeholders as a key component to the HCP development. As such, we've developed the outreach plan and strategy that provides an open and public process beyond CEQA and NEPA requirements and encourages input from the intake owners and operators throughout the plan development process. So as you can see here, we've got several stakeholder outreach meetings, and one we just had a couple weeks ago, last month, essentially. And we also have a few more this next year, and primarily we wanted to really encourage the engagement of the operators in the area to get their full support and also participation and better understanding of what's out there. And we're also providing other opportunities for status updates through our dedicated Solano County Cache Slough HCP website. And operators also can email and ask for individual meetings and more information. We also have flyers and other workshop events and in the newsletters and presentations that is on our website. Essentially, this also provides additional opportunity to engage with these owners on an individual basis that do not want necessarily to attend virtual workshops, but like more frequent updates for sure. In addition, we're closely, as Mike mentioned, we're closely working with our partners in the resource agencies in hopes to develop and to complete this HCP by this extreme timeline of the end of 2022, with the primary goals to provide regulatory assurances, support economic growth in the region, balance the species with water supply needs, and incorporates a sound science and analysis, and it provides an open public process. So next slide, please. So in general, in summary, within this region, agriculture is an important component of our overall economy. Now, the HCP is a critical tool to overcome some of the barriers, as you've heard in the previous discussion today, and it provides assurances for water take owners in the region. However, additional tools are needed for long-term agricultural sustainability. So why is it important for the flood board to consider ag sustainability in this region? It's because multi-benefit state and federal projects in the region can have long-lasting effects on our viability of local districts' ability to maintain infrastructure, preserve agriculture, and the surrounding communities to sustain economies that depend on these lands, as well as protect the open space and the agricultural values that Yolo and Slough County have long worked to support. So in the next segment, Elisa Sabatini from Yolo County will happily go over more ag sustainability needs, and there's other tools that are needed to promote and ensure ag sustainability in our area. So I'll hand it over to Elisa. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elisa Sabatini. I'm very pleased to be here with you all today. I'm the manager of natural resources for Yolo County, as well as Yolo County's representative to the Lower Sac Delta North RFMP group. Misty and I will spend the next few minutes talking with you about the ongoing efforts to collaboratively develop multi-benefit projects that address some of the barrier issues related to agricultural impacts that you've heard about this morning. It may be stating the obvious, but existing land uses in the Bypass and Cache Slough region are overwhelmingly agricultural, and flood control is incredibly important to the farmers and landowners in this area. If traditional siloed approaches are used to implement single focused projects, as has been the case in the past, there will be significant impacts to agriculture and the local economies due to the landscape changes that are underway in this region. Our local agencies, both Solano and Yolo counties, have long and proud traditions of directing growth to our existing cities to both protect agriculture and to ensure adequate infrastructure and services are provided to our residents and our businesses. Our local agencies have adopted land use policies and integrated them into our general plans and zoning regulations to protect agriculture. In fact, ballot measures are often required to simply expand urban growth boundaries. We take our responsibility to ensure the long-term sustainability of agriculture seriously, both in our words and in our actions. California is the top producer of agricultural products in the nation, with an industry value of $37.5 billion in 2010. The Central Valley provides approximately 25% of the United States food supply and approximately 50% of U.S. grown fruits, nuts, and vegetables. It also sustains over 1 million jobs annually. Approximately 1/4 of the country's rice production is in California, where Sacramento is the heart of the California rice industry. In addition to economic benefits of agriculture, agricultural practices also provide useful flood maintenance benefits to the system and the bypass, including vegetation management and drainage. The goal of the local agencies, Yolo and Solano counties, is to work with the partnership to develop an agricultural sustainability program that is consistently implemented with all proposed projects for flood protection or habitat restoration, using a broad array of sustainability tools which are integrated into project design early in the process. We see an important role for the flood board in this, in the convening and facilitation of this type of early engagement. Next slide, please. This infographic is a matrix that shows our conceptual model to integrate and promote agricultural sustainability into the landscape scale improvements that are planned for the Bypass and Cache Slough region. As you can see, implementation built around single-purpose projects in a chaotic environment of state and federal policies results in weak system resiliency and low agricultural sustainability. However, implementation from a holistic and programmatic standpoint, one that integrates agricultural and environmental land uses, ensures water supply reliability, and provides assurances related to long-term operations and maintenance, one that invests in critical infrastructure such as flood protection, drainage, and water conveyance infrastructure, as well as local transportation needs, will result in an improved landscape with strong system resiliency and ensured agricultural sustainability. The importance of agriculture to the local, regional, and state economies is not disputed. However, state and federal agencies are not equipped or funded to address the concerns of local agencies and landowners who are impacted by their policies and projects. State and federal agencies are not mandated to address impacts to agriculture outside of the narrow review afforded by the CEQA and NEPA processes. It is important to point out that the environmental review process is too late in the project design process to incorporate features or measures into these projects that could have minimized impacts to agriculture in the first place. These discussions need to occur in the early phases of project design, not once a draft EIR is released. Traditional mitigation methods, such as conservation easements, are useful tools, but they serve to protect agricultural lands that were at relatively low risk of conversion in the first place, and they don't adequately offset the true impacts to agricultural productivity, impacts to local tax rolls, and disruption to the local businesses that depend on a robust agricultural economy. However, as we have collectively learned through the collaborative design of the Lower Elkhorn Basin Setback Levee project, it is possible to identify and integrate project features that invest in agriculture in unique ways, such as ongoing contributions to operation and maintenance, consolidation of small special districts to increase efficiencies and reduce costs, and increasing the overall efficiency of drainage features. Next slide. The largest threat to agriculture in the region comes from the wholesale conversion of lands from agricultural uses to other uses, such as wetland or tidal ecosystem restoration. Though these types of projects are usually undertaken with willing sellers, impacts to surrounding agricultural land uses, such as the introduction of protected species or changes to water supply, should also be taken into consideration. It is critical that environmental and agricultural land uses be integrated in a fashion that ensures mutual success so that all boats can rise. As I mentioned previously, traditional mitigation models, such as conservation easements, do not address the impacts of these type of landscape scale changes. Measures that invest in and improve the regional agricultural economy will better serve to ensure the sustainability of agriculture over time. Some examples include creating incentives for farmers to voluntarily participate in market-based conservation programs and wildlife-friendly agricultural practices. Yolo County's HCP-NCCP is built on a foundation of wildlife-friendly farming practices. In addition, measures could include support for agricultural land trusts and habitat conservation plans that serve the dual function of sustaining agriculture and supporting ecosystem functions. Lots of great ideas have been discussed within the partnership working groups. These include improvements to drainage, flood control, and transportation corridors, the creation of agricultural buffer zones, and streamlining the process to transfer agricultural water rights when conversion of land uses does occur. They include investments in local reclamation districts that will result in better overall management of the flood control system and extend the life of the system itself. They include the provision of incidental take protections or other meaningful ESA protections for existing farming operations. Next slide, please. Investing in infrastructure is critical to success of agriculture and the long-term success of the many other uses of the bypass and cash flow region, such as recreation, ecosystem services, and flood control. Progress has been made in recent years to shore up levees, but this is an aging system with a large backlog of deferred maintenance, and much needed improvements are necessary to achieve our collective flood risk reduction goal. The bypass provides broad public benefits and is recognized as a regional flood control asset. As such, significant investments are needed, not only for these upgrades and improvements, but also for ongoing operations and maintenance. We are very pleased to see that the state is increasing its investment in the system. In the spirit of developing true multi-benefit projects, the local agencies have been busily working with our landowners, growers, recreational users, and reclamation districts to identify drainage and infrastructure improvement projects within the bypass and Tule Canal, with the hope that they can be integrated into future state and federal projects, thus further ensuring that all boats will rise. These locally developed projects are designed to address the increased frequency and volume of water that is anticipated to occur in the bypass, while also improving efficiencies and protecting important agricultural and recreational values. The existing land uses in the bypass, from agriculture to recreation, all depend on one thing, and that is water reliability. I'd like to ask Misty to come back to the microphone and talk about water reliability at this time. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Elisa. As we mentioned previously, I mean, it is clear that there's a lot of tools in the tool shed to be able to access, and there's a lot of also needs. And discussion of the HCP, it looks on the promising efforts to where the partnership can work forward to achieve goals where all ships rise. But there are still some additional tools that we needed to, as Alicia mentioned, to assure that water supplies for the intakes in the region are secured. And these primarily with regard to municipal supplies. And so it is additional that to address the water reliability concerns, particularly ensuring viable long-term water supplies through the North Bay Aqueduct, which is a source of drinking water for over 400,000 people in Solano and Napa counties. Safeguarding the water supply through the NBA maintains urban-centric growth, as Alicia mentioned, and supports the economies that promote agricultural sustainability. So as more tidal restoration projects come online, the NBA is coming under more pressure in order to maintain its required water quality needs. Tidal restoration projects designed to provide increased organic carbon for the food chain for aquatic species and impacts water treatment processes for municipal supplies. In addition, system-wide changes for hydrodynamics in response to both restoration and floodplain projects can also directly affect regional water supply reliabilities. As such, it's imperative to support improvements to regional water delivery systems through NBA Alternative Intake Project, along with improving regional conveyance systems that serve agricultural lands in the Yolo and Solano County areas. As projects are being designed and developed, there's also opportunities to use floodwater runoff to support managed aquifer recharge on suitable adjacent ag lands to enhance groundwater storage. This is critical since many of the ag water districts in the regions do not have a means for long-term storage of water, and the communities and farmers have turned to groundwater resources in times of drought and when surface water supplies are curtailed or not available. So project proponents for tidal habitat should also work with neighboring landowners and counties to pursue opportunities to transfer water and water rights from converted habitat lands to adjacent ag lands. This will ensure that water rights are preserved to support ag and increase the viability and productivity of these lands by providing water to lands that are previously non-irrigated. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Overall, any agricultural sustainability strategy must have three primary components or elements for assurances. An analysis of cumulative impact of proposed projects to ensure viability of long-term operations of critical infrastructure. Coordination of project designs with neighboring land uses to minimize conflicts and provide buffers to reduce local impacts. Extensive public outreach and understanding of what other landowners, neighboring landowners need, and to protect and enhance agricultural lands and long-term viability. And so since the loss of agricultural lands to habitat strains reclamation and local management districts that already limited financial resources, any ag sustainability strategy must include a regional effort to identify the cumulative impacts to these districts from the proposed habitat projects, as well as provide funding for ongoing maintenance and infrastructure improvements. This regional assessment and associated funding should also consider how those various projects will affect revenues from assessments and the financial viability of these districts to maintain flood and other infrastructure. So projects for restoration habitat should also be coordinated with neighboring levee mitigation work for benefits and reuse of levee fill material. This was mentioned by Rick earlier. So further, these projects should be designed to provide buffers where restoration lands could interfere with neighboring ag lands and other neighboring community operations. This would minimize conflicting neighboring land uses between habitat and ag operations, such as pesticides or herbicides operations and irrigation and other practices that may be incompatible with habitat. So further, these projects should involve a collective stakeholder process that includes early and often collaboration between the project proponents, neighboring landowners, RDs, land use agencies, and others to identify any issues upfront, develop a coordinated designs that minimizes regional and local impacts. These early and often coherent efforts along with good neighboring practices and the right to farm protections, allow for true collaboration as part of development for multi-benefit projects. Finally, through the collaborative efforts on a regional-wide scale, value-based projects that improve land quality by providing floodplain protections, increasing ag productivity, and ensuring long-term land stewardship can be realized. Thank you.
Thank you, Misty. So we're going to move on to operation and maintenance. Rick Reinhardt, are you ready?
I am.
Great.
Thank you, Rick Reinhardt, once again on behalf of the LSDN region. As the board is well aware, we have a flood control system that was designed and implemented over 100 years ago, or at least was started over 100 years ago. And the operation and maintenance practices have become more complicated with society's changing values, environmental laws, and we found ourselves with a system that is aged, has tremendous deferred maintenance, and increased cost, and we've had difficulty keeping pace. And so as part of the partnership we're looking at, we're changing the landscape. We're creating an opportunity to start over. And it's also an opportunity for us to change how we think about O&M. Instead of thinking about this as maintaining a flood control system, we now have a system that we're looking to provide multiple benefits, and we need to adapt our maintenance mentality to maintaining a multi-benefit landscape. Next slide, please. So the O&M work group is Ruth, Mary, and I co-host that work group, and the focus of the O&M work group is to develop strategies that account for ecological uplift for implementation of the program of actions that will avoid or minimize the need for repetitive mitigation and ongoing OMR activities. The point here is that we're envisioning a program that's going to have significant uplift. And to achieve that uplift, there's an O&M responsibility that goes with it, and that we want to see if we can find ways to track the uplift that's occurring, the ongoing effects and impacts of the mitigation, and demonstrate that we're still achieving uplift above that baseline over time, so that we're not getting into this compensatory mitigation for routine mitigation or maintenance activities. We've worked closely with the programmatic 408 work group and the hydrology and hydraulics sub work group with the 408 work group to synchronize these efforts and avoid any duplication. Funding for this effort is originally provided by DWR and SAFCA, and the ongoing funding for it is now as part of our new scope with the LSDN flood management planning contract. Next slide, please. So the O&M work group is made up of the state and federal regulatory agencies, the LMAs, and other stakeholders. We've prepared a number of deliverables to help advance what we're, both our understanding of what the issues are as well as opportunities to deal with these. So we've prepared a draft white paper that defines our program boundary, another white paper on the potential changes in land use and habitat, and roughness. The importance of the roughness, and this is how we characterize the vegetation in the hydraulic model, that this is going to become a regulatory requirement going forward. But right now, the state operates and maintains the capacity of the system to the 1957 profile and stage. And that's dictated by the Army Corps of Engineers. But now we're changing the system, and we can change the design profile and the design flow, and that's something that we've got to work through. Personally, I think it's going to be something the board ultimately has to adopt, but hopefully the Corps recognizes this as well, that with an expanded bypass and expanded weirs for this portion of the system, maintaining the 57 flow and profile no longer makes any sense. So back to these roughness values, that whatever we select for these projects becomes what we maintain to going forward. So we've developed a white paper that lays out the different approaches that the resource agencies have used that we could consider as part of our plan on the bypass. And then we've also provided support to the 408 work group, the H&H work group, and we've established a draft crosswalk table that lays out what the land use will be, what the habitat types will be, and then the associated roughness. The crosswalk table also shows how we're contributing to the measurable objectives and also defining the habitat types. And what some of you might have heard from our team is that while we're talking about a program that we believe very strongly is going to have significant ecological uplift, when you look at the project descriptions that we've got of the projects so far, the projects haven't got to the point of really being able to define that well. And so that's something that the O&M work group is working with the 408 work group to advance those development of those project descriptions to have that ecological detail that we can go back to the project proponents and say, hey, here's what we're seeing as an opportunity for you to consider. And if you do this, this is how it will help us at the program level. And then lastly, we're supporting outreach to the other project team leads. Next slide, please. So the additional current emphasis is placed on developing the detailed project descriptions. I just covered that. This is going to result in placeholders for these projects as they go through the formulation process. I'll call them goals, but they're soft goals, meaning that if we see as part of the O&M activities, we're going to have impacts on GGS. If we see that in these project descriptions, there's a shortage of GGS acreage, then we can propose certain acreages for the different projects to try to pick up to make sure that we're able to achieve uplift in that. This would also include riparian, Swainson's hawk. Let's go to the next slide, please. So finally, the next steps are finishing these project descriptions as suggestions for the project proponents to consider. We have to finalize our white paper on our permitting strategies, and just globally, or maybe summarize, there's two strategies we're looking at. If you look at the Yolo bypass as one program, the entire footprint of the Yolo bypass, including the levees and facilities that make up the bypass, the projects we're implementing they don't fill that whole space. They're increments. And if we just permit the projects and we don't look at this for the program level, there's going to be gaps. There's going to be properties where we don't have coverage for our permit coverage for our O&M activities. We're going to have LMAs that don't have coverage, and we're not going to have the ability to consider permitting this or crediting this as a system. The problem we're seeing with trying to permit the whole footprint is one agency needs to hold that permit. And one agency needs to be responsible for the accounting, making sure the mitigation obligations are met. Personally, I think that's the board. But that would be a different role for the board to undertake. And so maybe we're not going to be able to consider trying to do this comprehensive. Maybe that the outcome might be that we just have to improve the way we're doing this on a project by project basis and then work with other permitting opportunities like RCISs or doing an HCP that gives us the flexibility to make sure we have the ecological element to be able to do that ongoing O&M so that we're not trying to rely on our existing funding streams to fund the mitigation to make sure we can accomplish the O&M. Then lastly, we're going to develop a guidance document for project leads for inclusion in the O&M R&R for their project level planning and permitting. So this is one of the areas where I'm thinking that we could consider doing a more in-depth presentation on some of those white papers, what we're looking at, what the issues are, so that we can get some feedback from stakeholders and give this a little broader view and input and guidance as we go down the next couple of months, where we're going to be developing these products in more detail. So happy to take any questions on the O&M work group's effort.
Thank you, Rick. I think we are holding questions on this whole section until after Eric and I discuss the programmatic 408. I just wanted to thank you and Misty and Elisa for that presentation. I think the ag sustainability portion was really well articulated and outlined, so I appreciate your efforts on that. So moving forward, next, Eric Sy with DWR and I will close this section by discussing the programmatic 408. This includes our approach to navigating the Army Corps 408 process, as well as the projects that are on the horizon for implementation. Next slide, please. So the outline of this presentation, I will go over the master plan and programmatic 408 purpose and scope, the process workflow and advancement of the programmatic 408. We'll discuss the program criteria and potential projects on the horizon, as well as projects overview, key issues and challenges, as well as next steps. Next slide, please. So what got us here? The Army Corps of Engineers released the engineering circular in September of 2018. So this describes a long-term or large-scale plan, such as a watershed-based master plan, comprised of the construction of multiple alterations occurring over time. So this is consistent with the goals of the proposed program, as individual project approvals will occur in phases after a project level evaluations are met. So in response to this, the Central Valley Flood Protection Board issued a letter of no objection in July 2019. And this requested the Army Corps' review of the programmatic 408 efforts in coordination with state agencies. Next slide, please. So as detailed in the engineering circular, it mentions a master plan. So we're developing the master plan purpose and scope. The master plan we see as this umbrella document that will focus on phasing as well as modifications of the Yolo bypass cash flow region in a manner that accommodates multiple objectives through the implementation of projects and assurances that meet all of the partners' needs. So as you can see based on this slide, these are some of the issues that we're going to describe within the master plan, like flood risk management, improved operation and maintenance, agriculture sustainability, ecosystem restoration, recreation, water supply, and water quality. Next slide, please. And so if the master plan is the umbrella document that describes the vision of the partnership, the programmatic 408 will fall out under that umbrella document. And so this really addresses the needs of our federal partner, which is that any project should not be injurious to the public interest or impair the project's usefulness, referring back to the Sacramento River Flood Control Project. So why a programmatic 408? So this addresses a system-wide approach. We believe it also will save us time and money as projects move through the system for individual approvals. We will have a programmatic 408 document that covers, on a programmatic level, potential impacts from those projects. And so it also leads to a more efficient permitting path. Next slide, please. So we've been advancing the programmatic 408 efforts in the past year or so. The board and DWR worked together to obtain funding from Proposition 68. So we received approximately $10 million to develop and acquire programmatic permits in partnership with other agencies. And these programmatic permits will facilitate successful implementation of the high priority multi-benefit projects that are identified within the region, and also are the fundamental components of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, as well as the partnership. The funding will also enable these high priority individual multi-benefit projects to move through the federal regulatory process in a timely and efficient manner by taking a programmatic approach to the Section 408 approvals. So this is necessary to assess the cumulative impacts of the program on the performance of the flood control system. The money will also fund the permits, the environmental documentation, as well as 4 existing and 5 new positions within DWR and the board. So as part of that joint review with the Army Corps of Engineers, a hydraulic and hydrologic work group has been convened. It's comprised of subject matter experts from the Army Corps, the board, the Department of Water Resources, SAFCA, and representatives from Lower Sac Delta North, as well as consultants. The H&H work group has been working to establish the hydraulic baseline and determine the best available hydraulic models to evaluate the cumulative effects of the proposed projects on the Sacramento River Flood Control Project. Similarly, an environmental work group has been created to define the environmental baseline conditions for the program area and to provide a baseline against which individual projects and cumulative impacts can be compared and quantified. The board and the Army Corps of Engineers will analyze the potential environmental impacts resulting from the proposed projects through compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, as well as the California Environmental Quality Act. So the board is acting as the lead agency on the H&H work group, as well as the environmental documentation. In addition, we have ongoing coordination efforts with the O&M work group, as Rick mentioned, as well as the environmental permitting work group. Next slide, please. So this slide was developed to update the steering committee, the partnership steering committee on a regular basis, but this is really how the programmatic 408 work group sees the master plan and the programmatic 408 permission moving forward. So the master plan will capture the goals of the partnership, like as I said earlier, the ag sustainability goals, water quality, water conveyance, recreation, ecosystem uplift. While the programmatic 408 request really focuses on the needs of our federal partner, which include the CEQA and NEPA documentation, as well as addressing cumulative impacts of proposed projects. And just as a reminder, once the programmatic environmental documentation is complete, as projects advance towards implementation, they will need to get individual permits from the board, as well as a permission from the Army Corps of Engineers. Next slide, please. And I would like to turn it over to Eric Sy right now.
Right, great. Thanks a lot, Ruth. You are, and I'll just be providing kind of a high-level overview of the range of projects included in the programmatic 408 and the master plan. So as Ruth mentioned, we started with over 45 projects considered for inclusion in the Yolo bypass programmatic 408 and master plan. However, we applied a screening process using consistent program criteria, reduced the number down to a little over 20 projects. And so the program criteria is listed here. To be included in the Yolo bypass cash flow programmatic 408 and master plan, the project must, 1, contribute to at least one of the program goals and objectives, 2, be located within or has effects within the Yolo bypass cash flow complex. So if it's located outside the bypass, it must have some kind of effects within the Yolo bypass cash flow area. It's expected to be constructed after July 2019. And that date really serves as our baseline. And so projects constructed before this date are considered as part of the without project condition for purposes of the program 408 and the master plan. Slide, please. So here's a table then showing several of the projects that will actually not be included in the programmatic 408 request, because they already either have their individual 408 permission or they're planned to obtain it before the programmatic 408 is completed. So you can see several, BIOPS projects here in Levels and Lookout Slough. And the table here shows several primary objectives and also the proposed phasing for each project. And so, again, these projects are not included in the without project, baseline for the programmatic 408 because they were not constructed, prior to July 2019, and therefore the effects of these projects will be analyzed alongside the programmatic 408 projects as part of the programmatic 408 request. So, just to be clear, these projects will not be included as part of the programmatic 408 package because they already will obtain their own individual 408 permission. However, they'll be completed since they'll be completed after the programmatic 408 baseline. Their effects will be reflected in the analysis of the programmatic 408 package of projects. Next slide. This table here shows the package of projects that will be included as part of the programmatic 408. The table includes a wide variety of multi-benefit projects that increase the flood conveyance of the Yolo bypass, provide valuable seasonal floodplain habitat, or both. The primary objective and the approximate phasing are also shown here. And you can see that many of the projects are longer-term projects that are expected to be implemented more than 7 years from now. So next slide. So here is a map showing the projects included within the master plan, the program 408, which includes the individual 408 projects as well. So this map is color-coded. So the blue projects are 1 to 3 year projects. The yellow projects are 3 to 7 year projects. And the purple projects are the 7+ year projects. And I just kind of wanted to briefly explain maybe how this package of products kind of function hydraulically to increase the flood conveyance in the system. And so these conveyance improvements that are formulated in conjunction with or complemented by habitat restoration and or fish passage improvements. So looking at the upper part of the bypass, the Fremont Weir expansion, there's the increased flows in the Yolo bypass, reducing stages along the Sacramento River, both upstream and downstream. Setback levees downstream of the Fremont Weir increase the conveyance capacity of the bypass to be able to accommodate these increased flows. Next slide. In the middle portion of the bypass then, you can see on the east side here, deepwater ship channel improvement would increase the capacity of the bypass by conveying flows along the deepwater ship channel. Next slide. In the lower part of the bypass, you see additional multi-benefit projects that would increase flood conveyance and create valuable tidal habitat, such as Lookout Slough and Little Lake Tract. So next slide, please. So there are several key challenges associated with this this project. As noted on the slides, this is the first programmatic 408 ever developed in the nation, to our knowledge. So there's really no template to follow. There's new core guidance related to programmatic 408s, as Ruth alluded to. It's somewhat vague and somewhat high level. So a key challenge is really trying to navigate through this new federal policy in coordination with the core district, the division, and headquarters staff, while being consistent with the core policy and in process. Another key challenge is, I think Rick had mentioned this as well, kind of the lack of detail available for many of the projects right now. I mentioned before that several of these projects are longer term projects and more than 7 years away. And so, however, a certain level of detail is needed to be able to develop project descriptions for an environmental compliance document, to be able to hydraulically model these projects, to be able to analyze ecosystem restoration benefits and impacts, and also evaluate agricultural stewardship benefits and impacts. So working through how to deal with the lack of detail for several of these projects. And the final challenge is establishment and preservation of hydraulic and environmental baselines. This package of Yolo bypass cash flow projects are intended to function together as a package. And so with some projects causing hydraulic and environmental impacts, while others mitigating for those impacts. And so, but when taken together as a holistic package, impacts are mitigated for and multiple benefits are realized. So a key part of this programmatic 408 is establishment of a hydraulic and environmental baseline so that the existing conditions baseline doesn't keep getting reset after each project is implemented. And this is just really critically important when implementing a system-wide package of improvements, such as is shown in the programmatic 408. And of course, I included, in parentheses, the and preservation clauses, just because after we've established this baseline, it'll be important to preserve it until the system-wide, package of products gets implemented. And it's unknown at this time, what might be the statute of limitations on the programmatic 408 baselines. All right, next slide, please. So immediate next steps, there is an existing conditions hydraulic model that has been developed consistent with agreed upon baseline date. We are working with core hydraulic staff to get that reviewed and approved. We need to also develop the environmental baseline as well. We've conducted some scoping of the master plan technical analysis, but some additional scoping is also still needed. And we also need to increase the project specificity in coordination with project leads and sustainability and habitat elements of these projects as well. Next slide. And so with that, I think we'll just pause and see if you have any questions for any part of this section.
Great, thank you, Eric. Yes, we'll be taking discussion questions starting from Mike Roberts' presentation on the water infrastructure assurances, as well as ag sustainability, O&M, and the programmatic 408.
Ruth, let's see. Ruth, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Bill Edgar. I had a question. I guess this is to Eric Sy. You remember the biological opinion that the service did that we were under constraints about? Eric, do those projects that are underway now and will be considered a baseline satisfy their requirements, or are we depending upon the HCP to do that?
I know the question was directed to me, although I do think that maybe staff from the BIOPS program might be able to better answer this.
Okay, yeah. Well, you tell me who it is then.
Is Catherine McAlvine maybe, or
yeah,
Johnny Irving?
I'm here. This is Catherine. So the restoration projects that I talked about at the start under the State Water Project address their new biological opinions that were just issued in late 2019. And those projects address that mitigation. And so you were seeing them in multiple presentations. So Lookout Slough is one of those, Prospect Island is one of those, Lower Yolo Ranch is one of those. And then the Fish Passage project on the Fremont Weir is one of those. And so those will meet the requirements along with some other activities that we're doing. And so those have to be done. And obviously some of them are already done, like Lower Yolo Ranch. And because they're on a different time track and we have mandated deadlines for them, they don't really fit within the programmatic 408. And in fact, a lot of them already have their 408. So we're working actively to get them with.
Okay, so they would be, as Eric pointed out, they would be part of the baseline alongside the whatever is approved in the the 408 that's being developed right now.
So this is Eric. I can jump in with this part then. So it is a little bit of a mix then, President Edgar. So projects that have already been completed prior to July 2019, yes, are part of the for our cases of the program like 408 and master plan. They are part of the baseline. There are cases though of some of those BOPS projects that would be completed or will be completed after July 2019. So maybe Lookout Slough might be an example of that. And so for those projects, they're already seeking their individual 408, and they're not going to be part of the programmatic 408 request because, like as Catherine just mentioned, they're already seeking their individual 408. But we will be able to capture those effects because they do have hydraulic effects, so ecosystem restoration effects as well that need to be looked at in conjunction with the rest of the projects.
Okay, so they're actually those ones that are the last ones you mentioned are actually getting their own 408. But okay, all right, I understand that.
Yep.
Okay, then on Michael, when you talked about the HCP, is that going to be overlaid on the entire Yolo bypass footprint, or how is that going to work?
No, so it's a much more, it's a much smaller plan area that's been identified just based on the biggest concerns that we've heard, going all the way back to BDCP days, that, folks were concerned about those water intakes and whether they'd be kept whole and be able to operate as they are now with all these projects coming into the neighborhood. So actually, we can probably go back to the slide presentation if you like, but there's a figure on there that shows the plan area, and it's considerably smaller and does not extend all the way up north to cover the entire Yolo bypass. And that's really because that plan area is driven by what you define as your covered activities. So we've kept them very specific.
Okay, you indicated that you're talking only about water assurances. What about projects? Well, like Rick Reinhardt mentioned, the maintenance, operations and maintenance that the LMAs are doing. Do they go through a separate review on that, or how do they deal with that? Is that going to be a separate HCP? I mean, you have water assurances, huh? You have water assurances, and then I would imagine there would be flood control assurances and maintenance and operation assurances, and a whole potpourri of assurances that we're going to have to do. Is the idea just to look at water first and then go to these others, or what?
So the Water Assurances Working Group was formulated to address that very specific need that was identified back in the early days of the partnership, when we talked through which were the big stumbling blocks. So that's why that one is so targeted. But to your point, and I'm no permitting expert with that caveat, there are probably others on the call that can answer this more clearly, but the HCP certainly won't stand in for any of the regulatory processes that every single project is still going to need to go through. That's still very much the case. The programmatic 408 will still have to go through its own CEQA, and all the other efforts will have to do the same. Very likely the O&M effort would need to do the same as well, but I haven't followed those discussions lately, so I don't know how that group plans on working through their regulatory processes. But I wouldn't say that an HCP is an appropriate fit for all the various things we're all working on. There are various tools out there depending on whether you're looking at, I don't mean to get in the weeds here, but whether you're looking at needing to go through Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act to get protection, or whether you go Section 10, which is an HCP. So all to say, there are a number of different routes that different projects and efforts can go. I doubt that answered your question, but I'm not quite sure how the other working groups are addressing that right now.
Well, it answered the question, I think, but I just kind of looking down the road, and it looks like we're not going to be able to get some sort of a permit to allow, like the maintenance and operations activities for the LMAs has been a sore point for DWR and the local LMAs for a long time. And it just to go through this whole process for each little thing you have to do for operation and maintenance doesn't seem like a lot to do. But then on the other hand, if you try to do a overall permit for the area, say the Yolo bypass, it looks like almost an insurmountable task at this point. And it is, from what I understand, it is a major endangered species issue, because we're talking about the holes in the levees that are resting places for the garter snake, and that's a big issue for the LMAs. I mean, really the big issue for LMAs, of course, is erosion and burrowing animals. That's what they are. So I don't know how we're going to get around that, but it looks like to me the way we're headed is different tools for different activities as we move along. Is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. And, you know, for that oh, go ahead.
Thank you. So this is Ruth with the board. And President Edgar, I just want to let you know that we are tackling that in the environmental permitting work group as well as the O&M work group. That work group is staffed with folks from the resource agencies, NIMS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, CVFPB. And so we're really trying to come up with a strategy on how we do that O&M permitting. It's one of the goals of the work group. It's also identified as a barrier issue under the O&M umbrella. So we are trying to figure that out with the appropriate players.
That's helpful, Ruth. I just, you know, for the board's information, I guess we're looking at different remedial actions depending upon what barrier we're talking about. If we're talking about water supply, Mike's kind of addressing that. If we're talking about operation and maintenance, I guess the work group is addressing that, but we're looking at, you know, a whole variety of tools to address these various activities that have to go on regardless of what we do in the future. But that's real complicated. One of the things, by the way, and I'll just, for Brian's information, put in my own 2 cents here. One of the things that Rick mentioned is who's holder of the permits as we get this? Is it one of the counties? Is it the city or whatever? And one of the good things about having a governance structure for the partnership is that they would hold the permit, and that would be something that they could do. They'd have to be funded to do all the work for that, but that would be one way to do it, and that's, in my opinion, the reason you need a governance structure. Let's see. I guess that answers my questions. Thanks, Ruth.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? I don't see any hands raised. Board members have any questions?
Ruth, I had a question. This is
Jeremy, go ahead.
Hi, this is Jeremy Eric. I wasn't sure if there was a hand raise function. I'm not as familiar with Zoom, but I had a question for Eric Sy related to the H&H work group discussion. Eric, I recall back to the Sacramento River Basin-wide feasibility study we did several years ago. You know, we looked at expanding the capacity of the bypass first, and then opening up the flows into the bypass through expanding the weirs. So I know that the Fremont weir is further down the line in the 7+ years phasing, and I was curious with regard to the 2019 date that you mentioned, and projects like Lookout Slough and Lower Elkhorn. Those projects are effectively expanding the capacity of the bypass to allow for the eventual widening of projects like Fremont Weir. So I'm not sure if I'm understanding correctly, but will the hydraulic baseline be reset as a result of the 2 current projects that are being looked at and constructed before the Fremont Weir is built?
Eric, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Ruth. I apologize. So yeah, as I was saying, it's a good question. So with the baseline set at July 2019, that would be before Lookout Slough and levels implemented, right? So yes, the hydraulic effects of those projects would be accounted for in combination with improvements like the Fremont Weir expansion and another improvement to the bypass. So yeah, those projects are not included within the baseline, and so therefore those projects could help hydraulically mitigate, for instance, or increase the conveyance capacity to accommodate those increased flows from the Weir expansion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eric, for the clarification. And that's what I was hoping to hear, but I thought I heard something different, so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jeremy. Are there any other questions?
Ruth, this is Felix. I want to also make sure that there was, I hope this is common knowledge, but as I understand it, the programmatic 408 was always envisioned to establish those baselines and also be able to look at those collection of projects in the cumulative, in the aggregate. But at the same time, as I understand from my colleagues Ryan and Kevin, that only goes so far. The individual projects still need their individual permitting actions once you hurdle the threshold of the programmatic 408. If I'm incorrect, I invite Kevin and Ryan to set the record straight. But I just wanted to make sure that was mentioned.
That's right, Felix. I'm open to having Kevin or Ryan speak to this as well. But I did mention that. I apologize if it came off incorrectly, but yes, individual projects will also have to advance through the programmatic 408 approval process. However, it's the goal that this CEQA and NEPA documentation will provide the coverage for these projects to tier off of. So when they go through the programmatic 408 process, their environmental review will likely be less stringent if they already have this sort of master document that's been approved and advanced through the federal and state laws.
That's my understanding as well. Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Hey, Ruth, this is Rick. I'd like to make a comment here.
Sure.
So we're talking about a hydraulic baseline in the context of programmatic 408. It has a very narrow purpose. I would encourage the board to think more broadly about how the hydraulics of the system have changed since you started implementing the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And in my mind, that goes all the way back to the passage of Prop 1E and investments that have been made since that time. So the importance is, if you're a property owner in Solano County or Yolo County or an LMA, July 2019 is not significant to you. It's, how cumulatively have these actions that have or will occur change the performance of their levee system or the flood stages on their levee system. So, the Joint Federal Project, the Folsom Raise, the South Pole Setback Levee, there is a host of actions that have occurred that cumulatively are going to improve the situation throughout the bypass for the full range of flood events. And that story is important to communicate outward to the public, that implementing the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, while being done incrementally, will cumulatively have these benefits. And to me, that's a different discussion than we're having about the hydraulic baseline. To me, that's the public discussion and making sure they understand how these things fit together and everyone's going to benefit from it, and not a particular aspect needed to go through the core 408 programmatic permitting.
Thank you, Rick. Go ahead.
I think I want to reinforce what Rick just said. We seem to want to forget about the fact that many of the things that we've done have already improved or reduced the hydraulic impact or viability of the flood system. And we can't do that, because otherwise you get to a point where you can't do anything. The thing has to be looked on as a whole, what has been done to improve the system capacity. And if we do it incrementally, we're dead.
Well, what happens, Joe? Do we have to go back and kind of take 1957 and move forward and show how it's been improved, or what are we talking about here? How does that work?
Certainly, if we did that, we would show tremendous reduction in flows, for instance, in the Yolo bypass, because of the construction of Oroville and New Bullards Bar reservoirs and Black Butte Reservoir and the improvements in Folsom Reservoir. There's all been a tremendous reduction in the water that's the Yolo bypass has to have the capacity for. I don't know if we can go back that far, but certainly the work that we've done concerning Folsom Dam, for instance, has to be recognized as part of this Yolo bypass system, that we significantly have reduced the flows going to the Yolo bypass because of the work at Folsom Dam. So I don't exactly know how that works. Rick may be able to explain more about it, but it has to be recognized. And at the time the work's done, SAFCA was recognizing that, yes, this is going to be a benefit to everybody, including the Yolo bypass when we do this work. So anyway.
President Edgar, I don't think it's a stretch to include the actions that have been done post 2006 with Prop 1E funds. Those were all identified and permitted as early implementation projects in the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. They're identified as system improvements. Going further back from that, I think is problematic. But it is telling a story. You know, I was thinking this morning that I don't know how many people have made the connection, but when Auburn Dam failed and SAFCA pursued an incremental approach to flood protection, strengthening the American River levees, the joint federal project, the raise, the last increment was a step release plan. And I don't know that too many people think of what we're doing in the Yolo bypass as the evolution of the step release plan, but it was being able to pass more flows through the system meant you had to go all the way down through the bypass. And so it's always been thought of as a program, in fact, the American River Watershed Program, of how we improve flood protection for this entire system. And it's just continuing that thinking that just like we're starting with the bottom of the bypass first, Egbert, Lookout Slough, working our way up, levels with Fremont Weir being last, it's the same thinking that we started with improving the American River levees, improving Folsom Dam, and now we're moving out in the bypass with expanding the weirs and making sure those levee systems in the bypass can pass those increased flows from widening the weirs.
Well, I think Joe's right, though. If we don't do that, then we're going to be saddled with a hydrology that we're going to set forth in the 408 application, with a lot of these projects already included in the baseline. And then we're going to be stuck with any other projects that we have to do, or going to have to, on an incremental basis, reduce the flood stage and negate, essentially, not negate, but at least get us into the requirement that we're going to have to improve the flood control system over and above what we've had to do. And that seems to me to be a little bit, well, it'd be very difficult to do, I would think.
I don't want to confuse the issues. I think we have a very solid approach to the hydraulic baseline for the 408, and we can get through, navigate core approval for projects like widening the Fremont Weir after levels in Elkhorn are implemented, because you've set that baseline. But 10 years from now, when we go to widen the Fremont Weir, the property owner in Cache Slough or in one of the RDs along the bypass aren't going to necessarily have that history. And then you don't have to stop at July of 2019 to tell that story. That's all I'm suggesting is you can go farther when you are building that stakeholder support for those future actions.
President Edgar?
Yes.
This is Ryan Larson from the Corps of Engineers. Just wanted to, I guess, thank you, Rick, for your last comment there. I think we need to, for the purposes of the programmatic 408, July of 2019, that's a data point that is reasonable, and I think we need to use for the overall programmatic 408 effort and the projects that are going to go into that programmatic 408. For the other things that has just been discussed, I think those are valid reasons for our sponsor to come and say, hey, what did the impact of Southport have on the overall system? What did the impact of common features and these other projects, dam raise, whatever? What is the impact on the overall system from all of those different projects? And looking at updating the 57 profile, updating project documentation, let's say, for long-term operations and maintenance as a result of all those different actions. But I do think that they're two separate things. Over.
Well, that makes sense. That makes sense. As long as we have some tool to document that, I think that'd probably be a worthwhile effort anyway. Yeah, I agree with that. Okay. Thank you, Ruth.
Sure. And thank you, Ryan, for chiming in. I was going to put you on the spot there, but I think you read my mind. We have about 4 more minutes left for Q&A before our conclusion. Is there anything else?
I just would like to say that Ryan got my attention with updating the 57 profile, which is totally out of date and I don't believe should be used for things. And we've for years and years about this, and I hope that there is a way that we can this new baseline, considering all the changes that have been made, including the Feather River levee setbacks and the Yolo bypass setbacks and reoperation of the reservoirs. It's something that really is done. So I really support that.
Thank you, Board Member Countryman. Do we have any other comments or questions? And as I said before, if you find yourself having a question or input on today's workshop or the activities to date, please feel free to email myself and I'll get the project team to answer your questions or concern.
This is Jane.
Hi, Jane.
I'm just wondering if this PowerPoint, which is very informative and it's hard to really concentrate on one part of it as it's going through it, completely understand that workshop. Where will it be available so that it can be a little more study and look at it? I really appreciate all of this being put together in this organized fashion, but I'd like the ability to go somewhere when I have a little more time and look at some of them individually.
Well, good news about that is our hardworking consultants have made this PowerPoint accessible, so we can actually post it on our website.
Excellent. Yeah.
I can also, it's pretty large. I can email you a PDF, Jane, but I'll work with Ryan to post it on our website.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
That would be great.
Okay. So hearing no other questions or comments, I think I can turn it over to Steve Rothert with DWR, as well as Elisa Sabatini to provide our conclusion. Ryan, can you advance to the next slide? Thank you.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, everybody. President Edgar and Ruth, thank you. I think Elisa was going to provide her comments first. Right, Elisa?
Hi, all. Thank you very much, Steve. Just in summary and in closing, I wanted to share some thoughts with the group. Again, thank you so much for hosting this discussion, and thank you for allowing us to participate. The Yolo Bypass and Cache Slough Complex is the focus of large-scale landscape modifications being pursued by a wide range of state and federal agencies in order to advance important environmental and flood safety objectives. This effort is being propelled, for the most part, by voluntary transfers of farmland from private to public ownership. Such transfers are the right of every landowner when they think it best serves their own interests. However, the issue for neighboring landowners and their local land use agencies is to ensure that the resulting landscape changes do not undermine the health of the region's agricultural economy. This assurance must come from the federal and state agencies who are spearheading these landscape changes. The challenge in honoring this obligation is that the federal and state agencies aren't always on the same page. They don't always act as though they are engaged in a common enterprise, and each one of them is internally divided into either project development or regulatory units that each operate under conflicting mandates. This is why local interests have been so intent on creating a partnership of agencies that could serve to overcome these institutional divisions. In the case of the Cache Slough complex, the effort to create a Cache Slough habitat conservation plan highlights the progress of the partnership has made in addition to the obstacles that remain in our path. From a local perspective, it's difficult to explain to landowners that they must accept the uncertainty that comes from implementation of habitat projects because the state and federal agencies who are jointly pursuing the creation of fish habitat in the Cache Slough complex are unsettled amongst themselves as to what may be required to provide take coverage for the surrounding water intakes. Local people tend to view this as a failure of the government to protect them from the consequences of changes that the government itself is proposing. So what can the board do about this? We ask that the board listen to and understand the local concerns that in the agricultural landscape of Yolo Bypass and Cache Slough is being altered by state and federal actions that are not adequately coordinated, not because there is a lack of common interest among the responsible agencies, but because there's a lack of common managerial oversight. Local interests pushed hard to create the Yolo Bypass Cache Slough partnership, believing that such a body could help to address this problem. The board, as both an implementer and a regulator, has an important role to play in facilitating this discussion and helping to continue as we build on our successes and ensuring that all boats truly rise. Thank you. Steve?
Thanks, Elisa. And thanks, everybody, for participation today. As a new member of the DWR team, I've only been involved in the partnership for a few months, but I'm really encouraged by the progress that we've made, not only in advancing the projects and programs that the folks described today, but also in the progress we've made toward understanding each other's interests and concerns and building a foundation of trust that is so crucial for any successful partnership. This is important work that we're doing in this partnership. Successful, and I have full confidence that we will be able to help all boats rise, and we will be able to continue to contribute to the 4 societal goals that Mary mentioned in the workshop of public safety, stable economies, ecosystem health, and enriching experiences. As Rick Reinhardt said earlier today, this partnership has created an opportunity to start over. It gives us a chance to do things differently, in partnership, in collaboration, which of course means many things, but it certainly includes what Elisa said in her presentation about consulting early and often. And it also means something that board member Brian Johnson said about working to solve the problems of others while pursuing a solution for one's own problems. We will certainly encounter obstacles as we go forward, but today's workshop helps demonstrate the commitment and capacity that the participants in this partnership, including the Flood Board, DWR, the Corps, Yolo and Solano counties, and others, bring to achieving the partnership's vision. It really is a team effort, and I personally, and I know DWR is really proud and excited to be part of it. The California Water Resilience Portfolio emphasizes the importance of establishing and leveraging partnerships such as this one to meet the state's water needs through the 21st century. And I am determined to help make this partnership serve as a model for collaboration and action for shared vision. And finally, I'll just say, as we lurch through this very tumultuous and divisive period in our nation right now, I'm heartened by this partnership and this workshop as an example of folks coming together and overcoming diverse views and interests and concerns to work together toward a purpose bigger than the sum of its that we each bring. So thanks for the opportunity to participate in this and for everything that you all have done and others in getting us to where we are today. And I have great hope for where we're headed and what we could do together. Thanks.
President Egger, I just want to make a comment
Sure, of course.
I just want to thank everybody for their presentation and also for the tour that we took out there at the Yolo bypass. And as the newest board member, there's a lot to absorb here. And I'm, the lack of questions is not because I don't understand, but I'm just really marinating in all this information that I'm receiving. And it's really great to see that there is this effort to break down these silos in order to protect public safety, the environment, agriculture, the economy, and so forth. So I just want to, stress that I'm really proud to be on this board, and we look forward to where we go with this. And, it's been mentioned about, the system, and I look at the system above Sacramento and how we work that system and how it impacts Sacramento and how the downstream impacts occur. So I see the way we approach these projects are becoming more sophisticated, more efficient, and I'm really encouraged by that. So glad to be a part of this. So just wanted to put my 2 cents in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Ruth, do you want to turn it back to me?
Yes, that would work, President Edgar. And just again, thank you for all the presenters and all the support that went into the workshop today. I think it was a success. So I'll turn it over to you, President Edgar.
Okay, Ruth, thanks to you and all the presenters for the information and organized presentation that you had. I think it really is an excellent effort, and I learned a lot today, particularly about what's going on, and I think the other board members did too, as well as the public. This is a big effort that's being conducted, and a lot of work and a lot of moving parts here. So it's going to be a challenge for everybody. And Ruth, thanks for moderating what we did today. It was just excellent. Thank you. Okay, members, we're on item 5, which is public comment item, and let's just check to make sure no one else from the public has anything to contribute. Ryan, if you could do that for me.
Thank you, President Edgar. I don't see anyone with any comments as of now.
Okay.
Hey.
Then without, yes, Tim.
Hi, just real quick. I just wanted to piggyback on what Mary Jane said, and also Steve pointed out. I think it's really great, especially at this particular time, to hear a story from people about how they found a way to get a bunch of work done together where previously that was hard. It's compelling. Any one of these things would be innovative and maybe groundbreaking, and the stars have aligned. People have really accelerated the work and found a way not just to do it in a piecemeal fashion, but to think about how it relates to things that are happening in this. Somebody said start over. I don't think that's the case at all. I know this is decades in the making. A lot of individual people put their lives and careers into this, and it's about their relationships and their effort. And it's all really great to have now presented this way as well. I think we said at the beginning, just putting the package together demonstrates the relationships. It's true. So thanks to everybody for doing that. Very impressive. We're taking notes for the San Joaquin.
Yeah, spoken like an old Cal-Fed guy. Thanks, Tim. Okay, without objection, members, we're on item 6, which is adjournment. This would, without objection, this meeting would be adjourned, and we'll call it at 1:54. So we're under the major deadline, Ruth. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.